Good morning, everyone. It's now 10 o'clock and this hearing session is open. This session is part of the stage 1 examination hearings into the examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. I'll refer to it as the plan or district plan. My name's Roisin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the plan. That's submission document 01. This hearing session, and subject to my findings on the plan's legal compliance, etc., the subsequent hearing sessions that take place this week, then into May and June, are part of the examination process, which started with the submission of the plan in November of last year and will end with the submission of my report to the council. Am I close enough to the microphone there? At this stage, I'd like to introduce Jill Taylor, who's the Programme Officer. She's working independently with the Council at my direction. She's responsible for all the administrative arrangements for the examination. You've probably been in touch with her already. If you've got any queries about the running of the examination, please contact her by email or have a word with her at an appropriate adjournment. Few housekeeping matters, please. Phones, laptops, etc. If you could please put them to silent. Toilet facilities are on the second floor, if you follow the signs. I think we are expecting a fire alarm today, are we?
Yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. Okay, no fire alarm testing. So if it does sound, it's a real one. Out that door and follow the green signs. And the overfill room.
The Wickham room, as you leave the room directly to your left, there is a fire escape. So follow that, please.
Thank you. Just laptop leads, etc. If you've got them, I mean, perfectly reasonable that you need to charge your laptop. Please, when we adjourn, please can you just unplug them so that they're not a trip hazard for people who are walking behind the tables. Please avoid walking in this area because you can see all the trip hazard there. There shouldn't be any requirement for anyone to go in there. So I'm assuming that everyone has already seen copies of my guidance note. That's ED 14. That ED is examination document 14, matters, issues and questions, ED 13, 17, and then a short one after. And the hearing programme. At the moment, we're on version 2, that's ED 15. Those were all published on the examination website some weeks ago. My guidance note ED 14 explains more about the examination. So I've identified a number of matters and issues to be investigated, taking account of representations made, and the hearing sessions are going to be based on those. Now you'll notice that I've produced an agenda. Not every question that you may have commented on appear in those agenda. That's because some matters I am able to come to my conclusions without exploring them any further at a hearing session, and that's very much it's a normal process. Those matters that I need to dig into in a little more details will appear on the agenda, and we'll do so today. My role in conducting the examination is to decide whether the local plan has been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended and associated regulations, and whether it meets the test of soundness that is set out in paragraph 35 of the NPPF. The NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, and we refer to it as the NPPF or the framework. Now I'm going to read those out because what I want you to do, if you're in your representations as part of this session, I want you to point out to me which test of soundness you think that the plan fails on. So the first one, it needs to be positively prepared. That's providing a strategy which as a minimum seeks to meet the area's objectively assessed needs. Justified, an appropriate strategy taking into account the reasonable alternatives based on proportionate evidence, effective, deliverable over the plan period and based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic matters that have been dealt with rather than deferred, as evidenced in the statements of common ground, and consistent with national policy, enabling the delivery of sustainable development in accordance with the policies in the framework. So I've read all the representations and supporting material provided by all parties, written statements prepared for the hearings. I want to take those as read. What would be helpful to me, particularly as we have new people around the table, is to just introduce yourself and say who you're representing and the nub of your concern when you speak. Now, my starting point for the examination is the assumption that the council has submitted what it considers to be a legally compliant and sound plan. So those considering that the plan is not legally compliant or seeking changes to the plan have to demonstrate that to me, referring to the 4 tests of soundness. The council has requested that I take into account modifications to the plan. And it has put forward a number in response to representations made, and those are included in submission document 14A, 14B and 14C. Now, 14A deals with main modifications and some additional modifications. The difference being main modifications are required for soundness purposes. Additional modifications are small changes, typos, factual changes, etc. Those aren't a matter for me. I'm not going to get involved with those. Those are a matter for the council and they'll consult on those. And indeed, changes to the policy map. In the same way, I'm going to be concerned about consequential changes. So, for example, if a site boundary is changed or a site allocation is deleted, that those changes take place to the policies map to ensure that the plan is sound. But because the policies map isn't a development plan document, I won't actually be involved in that process. So today we'll aim to break at 1. We will take a mid-morning break that's usually about 20 to 30 minutes. Just to stress that participants need to be seated. I will say when we're going to resume, and we will resume at that time. So if you're, please can everybody come back promptly. Now, I'm familiar with the area. I've visited many times, both in my personal and professional capacity. I will be undertaking site visits, and indeed I've made arrangements for many of those. I have visited some of the sites, not all of them, but as we progress through the examination, I will be doing that. Now, I just want to set out, just to frame the discussion, my approach to emission sites. Part of my task is to examine the soundness of the approach to meeting the plan's needs, including sites that are allocated for development. Those that have been, those who have submitted representations to the effect that a site is unsound will be able to put their views to me at the relevant session. If they've made a request to do so, of course, the council will have the opportunity to respond. Now, sites that are put forward for inclusion in the plan, but not selected for allocation by the council, are known informally as emission sites. It's not part of my role to examine the soundness of emission sites, and subject to the legal right to be heard, such sites won't normally be discussed in detail at a hearing session. Now, should the situation arise that additional sites are needed, for example, if I find that that because the spatial strategy is unsound, or the housing requirement, or one or more of the site allocations is unsound, I'll look to the council in the first instance to decide which alternative sites or which alternative site should be tested and brought forward for examination. Okay. Now, what I intend to do, I'll spend some time with the council on each of my questions, then I'll turn to the table. If you wish to speak, could you please put your nameplate like that, and I'll bring you into discussion at appropriate time. And as I've said, if you can please just introduce yourself at the beginning. Now, it's most helpful to me not to hear the same thing 20 times. So if the person before you says a point that you were going to say, what's helpful to me is if you say, I've heard what so-and-so said, I fully endorse that, but I would like to add. Or if you're making a different point, just go ahead and do it. Please, focused contributions are most helpful to me. Okay, now usually we'll go around the table once. I don't want back and forwards, but it may be helpful to me to probe somebody a little bit more on what they've said, and we'll deal with that at the time. Okay, any other procedural matters that I need to cover? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, few housekeeping matters. As I said, I've visited some of the sites. I've made arrangements for those that I have to. What would be helpful to me, please, looking at the maps, and thank you for the postcodes that you sent through. I've been through and I can deal with most of those. What would be helpful to me is if I could have a map of each of the SHUA, the South Hampshire urban area sites, because they're large. Could you just put, I don't mind how you do it, but if you put some locational markers, street names. I'm not sure what that is. Street names or something that I can orientate myself on. That would be really helpful. Could I just ask about the main mobs schedule and how's that doing? Because I don't want to leave that too long. I'm working on SD 14A at the moment, and the numbering is getting me a little bit confused. So
we actually sent it yesterday to the programme officer, an updated main modification thing. It was only sent late yesterday, so apologies for that, but we just took a long time to do it. So it's with the programme officer to forward to you. Okay, very helpful. So what I'll do once I've received that, I'll start going through it, and what I want to do is use that as we go through the examination. What would be helpful to me is if I could have a printed copy, please. No. That would be really helpful. That noise is quite disturbing, isn't it?
Well, as a first step, close these.
What is it?
Extractor pack, fish and chip shop.
Yeah, that's not great. Yeah. Maybe we can get away with just closing the review, but okay, I'll carry on with housekeeping matters. That's actually all the housekeeping matters I've got. Are there any from the council? Okay. Okay, now we'll move on then, first of all, to we're dealing with Winchester housing allocations in the plan. That's matter 6, and the issue is whether the proposed housing site allocations in Winchester would be justified, effective and consistent with national policy. So we'll start with W1. Now I will wait until we've dealt with that.
Yeah. Excuse me, I had a question to ask. Yes, about just about the procedures, is this being recorded and transcribed? I'm unclear about how what's said today becomes part of your evidence base.
Okay, it is being recorded. The purpose of the recording is to make sure that people who want to be involved in the process have the opportunity to do so. There is an overspill room. I think, is that full or?
No, I don't think it's even.
Okay, certainly last week, that was full. The recordings will be retained. They'll be stored in accordance with GDPR requirements, and we've reached agreement with the council about how they'll be stored and when they will be disposed of. But I'm going to be relying on what's said today. I've got a lot of evidence. You've seen the wealth of evidence in the examination documents, and that's going to be my main point. It would be rare that for my purposes I would look back at the recordings, but of course they're available to me in the way that they're available to everyone.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that seems to have dealt with that quite effectively, doesn't it? Can everyone hear? And hopefully it's not too distracting. Yeah, that's a pity, isn't it? Because it's a very hot day. I won't start until we've dealt with all of that. Dealt with the Okay, thank you for sorting that out so swiftly. Let's move on to the first allocation. Now that is allocation W1 in the plan, and this relates to Barton Farm. It's now called King's Barton, and indeed I've driven past it, and I've driven within it, and I've walked around. Now this has an indicative number of homes for 2,000 dwellings. It's an allocation that is carried forward from the previous plan. Am I correct in all of that? Nothing there. It's under construction, and indeed some 675 dwellings are already occupied, and then we will deal with delivery, and we had a discussion on it last week, but some 500 have got planning permission, in addition to the 675 that are already built, and so we've got in the region of 825 that are to be delivered through this plan, and we've got in the region of 95 to 115 in the trajectory, and they're included in the first 5 years, so the 5-year supply. Okay, so that frames the discussion. You'll see my first question that I asked is there justification to deviate from the extant planning permission? Now I just want to say something about this because I don't want us to get sidelined. So the situation is this development has planning permission 2012. Anyone in the planning field will know that was a landmark case, Carla Holmes, in relation to the RSS. In actual fact, so that went through the courts. The original decision was a Secretary of State decision in 2012. So the Secretary of State took that decision. That included the realignment of the Andover Road. Now, as my understanding is that that's proposed to be realigned from Wellhouse Lane, and that's the junction with Harestock Road, isn't it, to north of Park Road. Okay, so understand all of that. So that matter was aired at consideration of the outline planning application. Then it went through reserved matters. It was retested at appeal and the Secretary of State decision at 2012. And we know that it then went through the courts. Now, I asked the question, is there any justification to deviate from that position? Now, the situation is that's an extant outline planning, but it's an extant planning permission. Anything that I put in this plan or agree in this plan isn't going to change that position, that the developer has planning permission, and that's a live planning permission to deviate that road. Now, I know that local people, the reason I'm raising this is because a lot of the concerns that I've been reading are on this very point. Local people wrote to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State helpfully or otherwise said, well, you know, nothing to do with us. Actually, it's local decision making, and indicated that the developer and Hampshire County Council could come to an alternative arrangement. That is the case. That is the case, but that isn't something that I'm going to deal with in this process. Carla Holmes can go and speak to Hampshire County Council, and they can say, well, actually, we've decided that we don't want to close Andover Road, and put something else forward. Now, in the evidence I've read that the exec lead for Hampshire 2050 carried out some work and came to the conclusion that the option to close Andover Road was the correct one. Alternative options were considered and they were discounted. Just could I turn to the council? Just tell me how that feeds in to what I just said, because you know it's an extant permission.
Thank you. So Adrian Fox, Strategic Planning Manager. I think we made it clear in our hearing statement that we were very careful when we obviously rolled forward this allocation to make sure it reflected obviously the extant planning permission, and we didn't deviate from that because, as you quite rightly said, obviously that's a live application, and obviously we've got Carla Holmes around here, and we've got no indication before us that obviously any change to that, but obviously clearly we've got Carla and we've got Hampshire around the table. I'm sure would like to comment on that. So like I say, we are very clear that we mirrored exactly what was in the extant planning permission. Very careful to make sure we did.
And you answered my question, which I I fairly put to the council in my questions. You have said to me there isn't any justification to deviate from that. What would be the position were I to deviate from that? Maybe Mr. Urquhart can help me if I were to deviate from that outline planning permission.
Well, an allocation and a planning permission are different things. So obviously you are at liberty to deviate in terms of allocating the site. The extant permission would remain and could continue to be built out, and one would assume that's what would happen. In those circumstances, I suppose the question would arise as to whether it would be a sound policy, an effective policy to try and allocate in a different way from an extant planning permission which is being built out, and one would question the purpose and wisdom of doing so. So I think that's how legally and policy terms it all hangs together.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Urquhart. Okay, thank you for that, council. I'm going to turn to those around the table on this matter, please, if anyone would like to speak to it. Now I see, sorry, would you mind turning your sorry, turn it so that I can see it when you turn it up.
Oh, sorry.
Carla Holmes, please, can you help me on this point?
So George Worley, Lukenbeck, representing Carla Holmes. I endorse the points made by the council, and just to confirm, the outline planning consent is being implemented and it's in accordance with the policy, so there's no differentiation according to that.
Sorry, when you say the policy, you mean the policy in the extant plan?
In the extant plan.
Yes.
Apologies.
Okay.
And so the site's being out in accordance with the outline consent, which includes the closure of the Andover Road and the rerouting of traffic along the Winchester Avenue Spine Road through the Kings Barton site. As sort of set out in our hearing statement, Carla Holmes is currently discussing agreeing a deed of variation to the Section 106 agreement with the Highways Authority in terms of the trigger points for the diversion of the road. An agreement's been reached with the Highways Authority that the trigger points would be changed to 1,000 dwellings. And so
it's something like 675 or something,
yeah.
Isn't it? 625.
Yes.
Yeah.
650
Okay.
in the Section 106. So
Okay.
a timetable has been agreed with Hampshire County Council in terms of the diversion of the road, which will be looking to 2027, which will coincide with the trigger points for delivery of 1,000 homes. So just to be clear that the outline consent is being implemented, which includes the diversion of the road. So there's no reason to deviate from the extant allocation and the roll forward allocation.
Okay. Is Hampshire County Council here? Thank you. Can you help us? Can you give a view on this, please?
Yeah, Laura McCulloch, Head of Spatial Planning at Hampshire County
I'm
Council.
sorry?
Laura McCulloch, Head of
Thank
Spatial
you.
Planning at Hampshire County Council. Yeah, we would endorse what the council has said. And Carla, the County Council has had discussions with Carla. I think you alluded to the executive member for Hampshire 2050 having those discussions about whether or not Carla would be minded to put in a new planning application, because ultimately that would be what would be needed to deviate from the current position. And
So is that the in the evidence you refer to the discussions, the exec lead for Hampshire 2050, those are the discussions. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so we wanted to understand whether Carla would be minded to put in a new planning application to change the arrangements, and they confirmed that they did not want to because they have existing permission, and the decisions that were taken, the reasons for diverting the road still stand as far as they're concerned. And so we basically had that discussion because the county council itself can't change this. It would need a new planning permission, so that would be up to Carla to submit, and Carla has indicated that they don't wish to do so.
Okay. Could I ask, there are many people commented on this and I'm happy to hear from you. Kings Barton Residents Association, is that Mr. Sim?
Thank you. Yes, Mike Slynn. Thanks. Yes, I understand your position. You're not going to consider this issue. Can I just point out that if this goes ahead, it'll be the first time in UK history that a main road has been diverted through a new major housing development area. And I've listed in my evidence, our evidence, the consequences of that. However, it does pertain to W2 as well, and I see this issue doesn't come up under W2, so I'm just wondering how we really address that, bearing in mind our view is that the Sir John Moore Barracks redevelopment should not happen if the road is diverted. In other words, the road should be retained for that development.
Okay, I am happy to hear those representations when we deal with W2, so hold on to them until then. Thank you very much, Mr. Sim. Defence Infrastructure Organisation, we will be dealing with W2. I don't want to get too sidelined on it.
I can just make my point on this very briefly. I endorse what's been said around the table by the other participants. There are two mechanisms for changing the status quo. One is a planning application. Carla don't intend to make one. The other is the exercise of the power under Section 97 to modify the planning permission, and there's no intention to do that or justification for it.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to say anything on that? Okay.
Sorry, Inspector, would you mind just hearing from the county again, Mr. Laura?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, Adrian just thought it might be useful to explain the rationale behind the rerouting of the road when the planning application was originally being considered. So there were two primary reasons for the road being kind of diverted through the development. The first one was to feed the neighbourhood centre, so there was an economic justification for having pass-by traffic. Yes, so the new neighbourhood centre, you would have pass-by traffic and therefore retain its vibrancy and ensure that it remained viable. And the other reason was because at the time there was expected to be an additional 150 pupils arising from the development that would need to be accommodated at Henry Beaufort School. Now that school didn't have sufficient space on site to facilitate an expansion for 150 pupils without going onto its playing fields. So the playing fields were going to be provisioned within the development, and there was a concern about having secondary age pupils having to cross a very busy road to access the playing fields. So by moving the road and having a kind of greenway pedestrian cycle route that abutted the school site, it meant that you could facilitate safe crossing of those children to the playing fields because it would be happening on a daily basis essentially. So they were the two primary reasons that the road was being.
And is any change in circumstance there?
Certainly not to do with the kind of economic position. No. I'm not entirely sure about the school place's position now because obviously the time has changed, okay. But yeah.
Okay. Mr. Sim?
Sorry to speak again. Yes, the second reason, there is now a signalised crossing of Andover Road, which provides access for children visiting or going to the primary school, and it also provides provision for students going to Henry Beaufort School. So I don't think that point is justified. It brings us back to the economic reason, and in our notes to us, we've made it clear that there can be no economic reason when you consider the environmental, cultural disadvantages of having the diversion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to say anything? I don't intend to revisit this. I know it does come up in W2. Okay, let's move on then. So we've got comments from the lead local authority. Don't be in relation to groundwater. Those are indicated as suggested main mod 68. Could I ask the council to introduce that, please? And I'm just going to turn up SD 14A. So the Environment Agency have asked for reference to the lead local flood authority to be included.
That's correct.
That to me, that's in the supporting text.
Yeah, it's in paragraph 12.10. We've already cited the Environment Agency, and for completeness, we should list obviously the lead local flood authority. Basically how that can be addressed. It's just a minor point of clarification, but we're happy to put it forward as a main modification.
Okay. I don't have any further comments on that. Does anybody else have any comments on that? Carla Holmes?
Just to say that we're aware of the main modification and some dorsal points made by the council. There's some minor change for clarification.
Okay, and let's move on. I asked a question about the Hairstop wastewater treatment works and sensitive land issues, and what the council said that an EIA to me was that an EIA has been carried out at outline planning a stage, and that's indicated that an odour plume exclusion zone has been taken into account in the master planning process. So that means that sensitive uses have been located away from that, including to the north, the park and ride, its influence, the location of Resi and the school. Is there anything else that you want to say to me on that point?
Don't think there's anything to add. It's just you can see yourself, Inspector, when you go out on site that the majority of that part's being developed, and actually there's works on site in the northern part of the development already. So we don't think it's necessary to add that as a criteria or requirement, because obviously the agreed master plan sets everything out clearly.
Thank you very much. And then we move on to delivery of the site. Just going to get my trajectory out, and we had a long discussion on this point on in last week's discussion when we were dealing with the overall housing needs and the timescale for its delivery through the plan period. So what came out of that discussion was that delivery hadn't been as expected. It has been delayed, and what the council said to me was that that was a lot to do with the fact that major infrastructure had to be laid out, and particularly that Spine Road and the arrangements as it meets the Andover Road. But there are a number of applications that are coming forward now. So 4 large phases, 2 have planning permissions or completions. So phase 1 is complete and occupied. This is my understanding, and please, if I've got anything wrong, please do shout. Phase 2A is under construction and partly occupied. So that means that 675 are occupied at the moment. Then we've got phases for which planning permission has been granted and they've been commenced. So that's phase 2B and phase 3A, which together gives some 500. So one's 291, the first 291, the next 208. So that leaves, as we said, about 800 odd outstanding, 825. What I've heard is that reserve matters applications are in for phase 3B. Now, in relation to what? And I don't mind if the council answer this or Carla Holmes, or it might be helpful if I got a view from the council first and then I go to Carla Holmes. So phase 3B, reserve matters have been submitted. So what I'd like to know is how many homes does that include? When was it submitted? What is at play, and how long, when is that likely to be approved?
If I could just defer to Carla first of all, if I may, because they'll know the ins and outs a lot better than me.
And then you can,
then I can
come back to you
That's
on
right.
likely approval. Okay, back to you. Is it Mr.
Worley.
Worley?
Yeah.
Mr. Worley. So reserve matters are in for 3B. What does that include?
So that was submitted in March of this year, and it includes reserve matters for 125 dwellings.
125.
125.
Yeah. So what sort of matters are included in in those reserved matters?
It was only access that wasn't reserved at outline, so it was
So it's everything,
so it's everything, yeah.
everything else. Okay, could I turn back to the council? What stage is that application at?
Forgive me, I don't work in development management, so I might need to check. But my understanding was it was submitted in March. We're basically going through that at the moment to basically obviously check everything's being submitted. I'm afraid I don't have a timetable for when it will be approved, but we can find that out for you if that would be
Would you mind? So that's 3B and it's 125 homes. Okay, so you get your planning permission and what are you saying about its delivery? Carla?
In terms of the wider delivery, I suppose it's helpful to set the context. We
Please.
submitted a revised trajectory which updates the trajectory that the council included in the housing topic paper. And delivery is within the plan period and sort of completing in 2036, 37. And within most of that period, development will be delivering at a rate of 115 dwellings per annum.
Yeah.
And I think initially, as the council have said, when the development was starting to come forward, it was slow to begin with, but in the last 3 years, it's been delivering at that 115 that rate. And also, just in terms of the forecast delivery, we've currently got, as you've mentioned, phase 2B and 3A being delivered concurrently. So Carla is sort of committed to delivering at that rate during the course of the plan period. So I think that there's confidence it will deliver those in accordance with the trajectory.
What do you say? Last week we had quite a long discussion about, you've got 95, then you've got 115 throughout much of until 32, 34, 35, but that isn't in line with what's happened past delivery. What do you say to that?
I think sort of the point I was making is that the site has been delivering at that rate over the last 3 years, and in terms of how it's being implemented, with phases being delivered concurrently, that
so it has been delivering at 115.
Yes, over the last 3 years, it's been delivering at that rate. So that's why Carla are confident moving forward that it will deliver at that rate, as sort of set out in the trajectory, and with phases being implemented concurrently.
So what accounts for the slower delivery in the first few years? So this year, 195.
Yeah, I think the council sort of raised that last week, and that was in terms of the delivery of key infrastructure. I think in the early years, which accounted for the slower rate of delivery, and now that sort of infrastructure is in place.
But it is in place, isn't it?
Yeah. So it enables a higher rate to be delivered over the last 3 years and moving forward through that.
But you've been delivering previously at 115. I'm just querying the downturn to 95 in this year. Sorry, 24, 25, 25, 26, because we heard that about you've got quite a lot of infrastructure, particularly that spine road, etc.
In terms of I think that's the trajectory in the council's background paper, but I think in our hearing statement, we're sort of setting out that it's delivering at 115 throughout that period and not the 95. So our trajectory updates the council's assumptions in the housing topic paper. So we have it at 115 dwellings per annum from 24/5 through to 2034/35. So that updates the council's assumptions.
I see. So you're saying sorry, I just want to be absolutely clear. Last 3 years, you've delivered at 115.
Yes.
You're projecting that forward
Yes.
to 34, 35.
That's correct.
Council have put in 95 for the first 2 years of the plan period. Or well, sorry, not the plan period. For 24, 25, 25, 26.
Sorry, just to clarify, delivery rates over the last 3 years have been between 110 to 112. So it's around 115. So I think that's why we're confident moving forward.
Thank you for that. Council, can you clarify this 95? Not a huge amount, but
Yes, ma'am. Basically the 95 is the council's cautious estimate of what might happen, based on the fact that in the earlier years development was relatively slow. I think the figures that Carl have just given you are probably their sales figures, which are slightly different from our completions figures, but we sort of come to the same conclusion, and obviously they know better than us how fast they're planning to build.
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Is that right? Are you quoting your sales figures? Oh, you are. You. So completions on site. Okay. Okay.
Ma'am, just for clarification, Carla Holmes, their statement 2.35 for this this hearing session sets out their intended delivery, which includes for both 24, 25 and 25, 26, 115.
Yeah.
So that's the reference.
And then Carla, that goes right up the delivery 37, 38. It tails off, doesn't it? It tails off after 34, 35.
Yeah, that's correct. And we have sort of the last year of completions in 2036.
Yeah, what counts for the tailing off?
It's development's been delivered by phases, and that'll be the end phase to deliver that remaining number of dwellings.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else want to say anything, Mr. Fox?
There's just one other matter which arose out of last week, which was there were suggestions made that because of the, as people alleged, the lack of new allocations in Winchester, that there would be an exhaustion of the supply of affordable housing. We made the point that the Carla Holmes development will continue to deliver affordable housing as part of its Section 106 obligations. Mr. Fox has got the figures, but just to say that point was a thoroughly bad one. Hey, oh no.
I'm not keen on that.
No.
I think we might have to live with it.
Okay.
Can we not get the poll on? Just do it now.
Don't worry.
If I may contribute to that further to Mr. O'Cook's thing, discussion about affordable housing. So obviously it's 2,000 dwellings. It's got 40% affordable housing, so that's 800 affordable homes. We've already delivered basically, and that is affordable rent and shared properties. Vivid Homes have already completed and handed over 102 affordable homes. The City Council's also, as part of their kind of HRA to deliver homes, has also bought 146 affordable homes from Carla. So, and the affordable homes are being built to lifetime home standard code level 4. So obviously 800 homes affordable is the key message that we want to get across, is that site is delivering affordable homes.
Okay, thank you. And we heard last week that actually this is one of the major sites that's going to be delivering. We heard a lot about lack of other sites and that supply may be constrained in some sort of way. First of all, I'll put that to the council and then I'll ask for a comment from Carla Holmes.
And I don't think supply will be constrained because obviously, as we've heard from Carla, obviously the infrastructure is in now. The houses are going to be developed. Yes, there was a slow start, but now obviously development on the ground. We'll come on to St John Moore Barracks, which obviously is a large allocation, and we'll come on to the discussion, no doubt, about the phasing of St John Moore Barracks. So I don't want to preempt that, but we don't feel that it will be constrained in terms of obviously what is being delivered. And obviously there are other plans obviously in the city centre, and the city council are obviously in the market to actually deliver homes as well. And we'll hear that no doubt at the other hearing sessions about the council's ambitions to basically support the delivery of housing.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Carla Holmes, did you listen to the recordings last week? And what was put to me was that, well, you know, they're saying 150 per annum, but actually in an effort to basic supply and demand, that's going to be unlikely because you're going to be in a position where you're going to be the only one delivering. And I you know, I can take a view on that, but whether you are or not, but can you give me a comment on that, please?
So I listened to the recording last week for the hearing session in the morning. And as I said, we've been 680 dwellings have been completed and occupied as of today. And as I sort of said, in terms of our trajectory, completions we've been building out at that rate over the past 3 years. So I think it's reasonable to project that forward, and I think that sort of coincides in terms of Carla's assumptions in terms of market absorption and occupation of those dwellings as they're completed during the plan period. So I think there's clear evidence that Carla has been building out at the rate that we've said in the trajectory, which will continue on through that phasing trajectory, and in terms of sales, that those dwellings are being occupied as they're being completed.
I mean, it was put to me that you have an incentive to constrain supply in terms of keeping price high, basic supply and demand. I just want a comment from you on that, please. Is there any incentive?
It's Alison Thompson from Carla Holmes. We've actually accelerated our build because of the demand. We actually do have a waiting list. We've now got, as George says, phase 2B.
Sorry, Alison, can you put your microphone on?
Apologies. Yeah, so we actually have got a waiting list. So we are actually accelerating our build. Hence, we usually go by phase, and we complete phase 1, phase 1A, 1B, and then 2. We're now actually constructing 2B and 3A concurrently. Hence our commitment to Kings Barton. It's our key strategic site, so we're not holding back delivery. Our construction team are working extremely hard, and we're actually confident we can actually achieve those build rates and trajectory.
Is there any incentive to constrain supply?
I don't believe there is, because we've got the demand, and the sales rate is we're holding the sales that and the asking prices that we're requiring. We're not holding back because of that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone, Mr. Ripacek?
Yes, Mo, if there weren't any other comments on delivery of this site, could I make a general point on delivery or non-delivery, which
Yes.
you raised last week, a non-delivery buffer or buffer
yeah.
for slippage, and Mr. Ayling was in the hot seat and dealt with that. Could I just add something to that? Because I suspect non-delivery or alleged non-delivery or slippage will come up several times this week. So, and the point was, generally speaking, you don't know if there's going to be under delivery or slippage until towards the end of the local plan period, because obviously if a site slips, it slips into the later part of the plan period. So that can be addressed through a review of the plan, as this plan is doing with existing local plan sites that have slipped. And as I said last week, in fact, although some sites have slipped beyond the current local plan period, they've been more than compensated for by windfall sites that have come forward. But even if they hadn't, as the end date of the current local plan overlaps with the beginning of the new one, there is a chance to pick up and rectify any deficiency if there was one. Even if a shortfall was identified earlier, I'm not sure quite how that would happen, but I suppose if a site were withdrawn from being available at an early stage, that will be picked up by annual monitoring, by the need to demonstrate a 5-year land supply. And of course, with this plan, if that happens in this plan, we have the sites that are held back by the phasing policy that can be brought forward if there's a need to bring forward housing for land supply reasons. And of course, this plan is going to be reviewed extremely early, almost immediately. So in fact, you're probably going to have at least 2 or 3 reviews of this plan before its end date of 2040. So there are lots of opportunities to address any non-delivery, and I'd suggest really that's a bit of a red herring, and possibly why it doesn't feature in government guidance. And of course, a non-delivery buffer is very different from the 5-year housing land supply buffer of 5, 10, 20%, whatever it is, because that is due to be, or that is intended to be brought forward from later in the plan period. So that's within the local plan figures, not in addition to them, whereas what's being suggested to you as a non-delivery buffer will be in addition to the local plan numbers. So I suggest, given the circumstances of this plan, that really just confirms the council's view that there isn't a need for a non-delivery buffer.
I mean, you often do include a non-delivery buffer where you've got a situation where you're making assumptions based on, I don't know, Litchfields or whatever type of site comes forward, etc. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're working on developer intel.
Yes, we're working on the basis that we've got realistic assumptions and expectations of the allocated sites and the windfall and all the other sources of development. Yes, some other authorities do include a non-delivery buffer. I think some get confused or are led into confusion with the 5-year land supply buffer as well. People talk about buffers in different ways. As I said, we don't have a history of under providing on our local plan targets, and that there are ways of addressing that even if we did.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave that matter. Thank you, Mr. Oakcheck. Okay, let's move on to site W2, and this is the Sir John Moore's barracks. It's just up the road, isn't it, from the Kings Barton site or Barton Farm site? I find it helpful to just have it in front of me. Yeah, I've got that there.
The general map.
Yeah. And so this is a new allocation. It isn't, many of them are extant allocations. This is a new allocation. And what you've done is you've said an indicative number of 750 to 1,000 dwellings, with a park and ride facility for 850 spaces, and that will have a dedicated bus route into Winchester. So the other one, the other side is a park and ride light. This is a park and ride. Half the site is in the settlement gap, the Winchester and Littleton settlement gap. You've got some PDL, you've got some landscape and conservation value in the site. It's still occupied, isn't it? The site is still occupied by the military. You've got other constraints. You've got the Flower Down sink. You've got a candidate sink to the north. You've got the River Itchen Sack impacts, the Nuns Walk stream. You've got flooding issues some of the site is in flood zone 2 and 3. And just for context, we have a concept master plan that has been drawn up by the site promoter, site owner, that's ED12, and that sets out a proposed layout for the development. First of all, I just want to deal first of all with, I've got a number of queries and I want to turn to the council first of all, and I want to deal with, let's deal first of all with capacity. So you've got capacity, your range is 750 to 900. I've looked at the master plan, that suggests 900. In the trajectory that we spoke about last week, you've included 900. Why have you got a range in there, 750 to 1,000, if, you know, your figures that evolve from that aren't going down to 700, they're clearly pitched at 900, and now you've got a master plan that's indicating a capacity of 900. Could you just explain that, and whether putting a range like that is going to be an effective approach?
Thank you. Clearly, obviously, the work's been ongoing for a number of years now with a planning performance agreement with the DOI, Alison Young, about a year and a half, 2 years we've been working with them. And obviously we had design review panels. Concept master plan has been involving work alongside the local plan, if I put it bluntly. So when we were drafting the local plan, obviously we hadn't got the benefit of the concept master plan, which was actually agreed at Cabinet on the 12th of February this year. And obviously by that time we'd already submitted the plan. We obviously have to put a figure because obviously that's the critical thing, and we were confident with the 900 figure, which basically is actually echoed in the concept master plan. We did a lot of work actually with the DOI in terms of challenging them about the density and capacity, and I'm sure they'll quite happily explain what we did. And it was a very interesting discussion about what kind of place you wanted to create, because it's very easy to think, right, it's a brownfield site, let's see how many we can put on it. But obviously what we don't want to do is make it one generational in terms of basically a flatted development. We want to make sure it's a multi-generational site that people can aspire to move on the site and within the site, obviously as their personal circumstances change. And that was actually a very enlightening piece of work that we did with working with the DOI through the planning performance agreement, where basically we were looking at the opportunities, the mix, which obviously affects viability, affects obviously the site itself, but more importantly, what kind of place do we want to actually create there? And the 900 figure was basically came out of those discussions and confirmed what we thought originally. But like I say, we had a range in there because it was to do with the stage of the process we were at. But for the obviously the strategic transport assessment, we tested the 900, and that's the figure
one
we
of my
used.
queries. So it was the 900.
It was the 900. I think there's probably, just cut to chase if I may, there's a comment about a working assumption in the text, and probably that's not very helpful because obviously now we've moved on slightly. So obviously whether or not that could be a main modification, we're quite happy to delete those words.
So obviously you've got the master plan now. You're telling me that you're happy with this master plan, and that's on the basis of 900, and that's been fed into your figures. So are you suggesting a main modification to change that to 900?
We're happy to be consistent with how we dealt with that in the rest of the plan and say about 900, because work on the concept master plan has obviously reached the stage of Cabinet agreeing it, but it's further being refined as part of the planning application process. So in terms of obviously its kind of evolution, it's obviously set out the parameters for it, but that is being refined through the work that is necessary to support the planning application.
Okay. Okay, so it is an indicative number. All of these are indicative numbers. So, okay. I hear what you say. So you'd be open to an to just put the indicative number of 900 that you're saying has been justified. Could I hear, please, the DOI are here, or their planning consultants, could I hear about that process? I mean, you've got a lot. I've read out some of the constraints that are on this site. How was capacity assessed?
Yes, Ian Woodward, DIO, MOD. Obviously, we're talking about Sir John Warbax today. Yes, we are quite sophisticated how we look at our sites. We have a number of sites that we review and deliver. I'm personally responsible for an overview of about 50 of them in the whole of the UK, but I'm particularly engaged in this one because of its sensitivities. But the reality here is that it can deliver 900 houses or units.
I'm sorry, would you mind speaking into the
Sorry, can you hear me?
Mr. Woodward?
Yeah, it can deliver 900 units. We looked at it very carefully in terms of how we would actually work through the process and look at the mix of typologies. To be candid, at one time, the council were trying to persuade us to put even more units on there, but we felt in the conversations we've just had and you've just heard that it was right to get a balanced scheme so that people could live there long term, and in a sense you could have the ability to people to downsize and change as their families changed. So
it's not just resi, it's a mixed use.
It is a mixed use scheme, but it's essentially primarily residential, and it enables us then to create the right place and placemaking and a sense of place, a place for people to live and enjoy the environment. The scheme itself is only built on about 40% of the site. The rest of the site is open. A lot of our sites are unusual in the sense that people can't get onto our sites in terms of MOD sites because they are fenced. So it is actually handing quite considerable land back to the community. But what we wanted to do is create a balanced scheme, and we looked at a number of ways of approaching this, but we just didn't want to enhance the density so much that we ended up with having it over flatted. To be honest, the main demand is for homes and houses, and we're looking for about 20% of the units being effectively flats or apartments, and the rest will be homes in some form or another. We work very closely with the council through our PPA arrangements and consider this to be the right solution.
Okay, so look, you've got a whole range of constraints, and I read out some of them. For a start, it's in the settlement gap, you've got the sink, you've got a land use from the park and ride to the north, you've got a mixed use development. Tell me a little bit more about how that capacity, how taking all those constraints, a flood risk, we said, is another one, how you're suggesting that capacity can fit onto that site.
So we've done a lot of studies beforehand in terms of all of the different evidence based.
When did you start work on this site, roughly?
Probably 2020, I would think, as long ago as that. In more detail over the last sort of 2-3 years. We've got a lot of knowledge of the site. Just dealing with the sort of flooding point and the extent of it, it's actually quite limited, to be honest. It's a winter ball that comes across the site. In fact, to be honest, it isn't fluvial as such. So it's not as if there's a river across the site. I think you will benefit when you get an opportunity to go and have a look at the site. It'll be quite clear.
Yeah, it's a Winterbourne, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And to be honest, its appearance doesn't appear every year. The most of it is groundwater that comes up. So from about February to May, in one location, which is near the entrance to the main entrance on the right-hand side, that's where the main flooding is. We don't propose to put any housing there at all, and we wouldn't do, obviously. And we've got sufficient setback distances from those flooding areas. So in that sense, in terms of capacity for the site, it's not a problem at all. In fact, it's quite an interesting feature in terms of the way it works. In terms of the balance of the scheme, we've got an existing sink there, which we are not
Flower down,
yeah, the flower down, which we don't intend to build on, obviously, because it's retained. And also we're retaining a majority of the woodland that's there. There's a small amount for road access that we'd have to remove, and there's another element that we might have to move slightly in relation to the park and ride location. But the park and ride location doesn't challenge any of the sort of housing development.
How does, so, sorry, I'm just looking at the master plan here. So the suggestion is that most of the development, that the sink, the flower down sink will be free of development.
Yeah.
And of course, that is the part that is suggested will retain, I think, will retain the settlement gap. Then you've got the PDL element, which is likely to be where you've got most development.
Yeah, so in terms of the current density of development is towards the sort of middle to south of the scheme. And we believe that the neighbourhood centre will go where the main density is now.
Yeah.
We do have a large parade ground, which obviously isn't built on, but that is also where the neighbourhood development will go. In fact, just to the north of that parade ground would be where the main density is. As you come further south, though, respecting the settlement gap, and also because of the way the distribution of uses or style of buildings would be across it, that we've actually reduced the density significantly as you move further south towards Kennel Lane. It's all about creating the right ambience on the site, and also the ability for people to get access across the site, because there'll be a number of pedestrian and cycle routes between Harestock and Littleton. And so we don't want a sort of wall of development, if you want to call it that would then become uncomfortable in terms of views, vistas. So we wanted to have that sort of lighter feel to the south. And that also ensures that the main settlement gap per se, which is obviously under review, we recognise that as part of this master plan, but the settlement gap is still maintained because you've got a considerable amount of woodland retained, the sink retained, and also you've got, as you might see on the western side of the master plan, you've got the western side of the master plan, you'll see that we've retained the playing fields as well.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to. Okay. So I can see the master plan here. I can see that what you're suggesting to me is you've taken the design-led approach. Okay. Let me go back to the council because dealt with capacity. I want to deal with the settlement gap because the site sits within the settlement gap, and that's the Littleton Winchester settlement gap. What testing have you carried out to assure me that the openness of that settlement gap will be retained? Now, I've heard what you've said. You said that there is development in that settlement gap already, and I think what you're referring to is the development, the PDL element of this site. Just explain that to me, please.
Thanks.
Please.
That's correct. It's quite an unusual settlement gap and quite unique in that respect, that the settlement gap actually includes a large part of the built development on the site, which you'll see when you go to the site visit. So it's quite unusual in that respect. So our view is basically, because this work is evolving, we cannot at the moment define the actual settlement gap. We feel that basically it would be better to do that once we know the extent of the development. So we've talked about the existing sink along the southern part of the site, which is obviously a logical part to retain within the settlement gap. But we feel there's other opportunities to basically potentially extend the settlement gap slightly on the north. I know the DOI have submitted their kind of starter for 10 in terms of how the settlement gap could go. But really, we feel that it would be better to define that settlement gap basically once we know what development is going to be there. I know obviously I've read Littleton's parish council's hearing statements that it's cart before the horses, but we actually feel it's the right way round, because it'd be more beneficial to actually see how can we actually extend this settlement gap. Are there other opportunities to basically incorporate it, rather than basically at the moment, obviously the think is kind of the known, if you sort of mean, in terms of settlement gap. It's what other additionality we could add to that settlement gap, but there clearly would be a separation between Littleton and Winchester. But obviously, as Mr. Woodward said, the main thing is basically it's a closed site at the moment, and there are opportunities as part of this development to enable public footways, people to actually enjoy the site, access the playing fields, sports facilities. Whether or not obviously the swimming pool is still there is still for debate. But like I say, there is a great opportunity through this development, and as Mr. Woodward said, only basically 40%, of the site's going to be developed. So there are opportunities to it, but like I say, we want to do that more refined work once we know what we're dealing with.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. So you've got the settlement gap. You've said that there is development already, and I take your point there, but this is going to be more development, isn't it? And it probably will be higher than what's there. My understanding is, and only from Google Earth, walking around the site, not within it, is actually really very low level at the moment. What sort of testing have you done in relation to that settlement gap and the increase in development, and particularly density and height?
I think the density and heights it's been started as part of the concept master plan, and obviously will be further refined as part of the planning application process. Like I say, we've entered into a PPA with the DI and working very constructively with them about the site and how it could come forward. I don't think it's technically correct to say it will be higher density in all places, and that's the sensitivity testing that's being undertaken at the moment, because clearly there are parts of the site, and it comes back to this is going to be a mixed tenure site, so it's not all flacky development. I think if we were going for that, it's the wrong solution for the site. There are opportunities, and the character of the site changes, and you'll see that when you go out on site, in terms of particularly around the edge of the settlement, around the kind of main road, Kennel Road, etc. Totally different characteristic to the main part of the site, which you can't actually really see from the road. So, like I say, I think basically it's a good.
You mean that
the actual main bulk of the site, if I call it that, it's just not visible at the moment.
No, the main bulk of the site is built up, isn't it? And around the edges, Kennel Lane, Hestock Road is sort of semi-rural and wooded.
That's right.
And,
totally
and even the Andover Road.
Totally different characteristic, and a design solution for those sites will be different to the main part of the site. And obviously where the neighbourhood centre is, where obviously perhaps you'd want higher densities. So the characteristics will alter and flex according to which part of the site you're on.
Okay, sorry, I come back to it though. In terms of the settlement gap, has there been any testing on the impact of the suggested master plan on that settlement gap?
No, the
openness of the settlement gap.
Settlement gap review that we did with LEC, which is going to come up in the biodiversity topic, didn't look at this for those particular reasons. We were very clear about what it could do and what it can't do, but we haven't obviously looked at the sensitivities. They will be done basically as part of this work. Journey evolves as part of the master planning process, part of the planning application process.
How can you be assured, therefore, that development, say for example, that the outlined in the master plan won't adversely affect the openness of that settlement gap?
Well, I think that comes back to the policy in the local plan that would need to be demonstrated as part of the planning application process. And a key part of that planning submission will need to demonstrate that and be open and transparent about how it addresses that. But like I said, at the moment, we haven't got that information.
And that is that NE7?
That's correct.
NE7 is the settlement gap. So any development will need to accord with that. And
that's correct.
Okay, I understand. And sorry, on this point, you said that there may be opportunities to enhance that gap. Just give me a flavour of that. I'm looking at the master plan here, and I've got the site in front of me.
I think, I know in the DOI submission, obviously, I think it's Appendix 1 or A, in their submission, they put forward basically a kind of starter for 10, if I could put it that way, in terms of the settlement gap.
Got it in front of
But
me.
I think,
Yeah.
obviously, what we've also done is just overlaid basically the concept master plan developable area over that, and just to see what would actually happen. And I think there are other opportunities to extend it further. But like I say, that's a more granular piece of work that we want to undertake.
Okay, and you alluded to the fact that the settlement gap hasn't been defined. That, and you've heard what people say, the cart's before the horse. Surely, what do you've already touched on it, but why is this process the right process?
I think it is the right process for this site, given that there is existing built development within the settlement gap, and the unusual characteristics of this site mean that it's the right and logical way to do it. And like I say, it's not being forgotten about, but basically at the moment it's being done in tandem with the work that's coming forward.
Okay. Okay.
It's also just worth noting that the policy itself, W2 in Little Roman 1, provides explicitly for the delivery of settlement gaps for the whole site.
Sorry, which one's that?
W2 Little Roman 1, the first paragraph, about 5-6 lines down.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I want. Well, I'll tell you what to do. I'll go to the table now, please, on those two issues, the two issues of capacity and settlement gap. One goes with the other, and then I've got a number of other questions for the council. Could I just go through Vistry, please?
Good morning, Madam. Adam Ross from Nexus Planning on behalf of Vistry and Taylor Wimpey. You raised absolutely the right questions, Madam. So I won't repeat those, but I think you're being put in an enviable position here. And what I'm hearing from the council is that they're asking you to endorse an allocation with no idea whether it's deliverable or not. You're signing up to something, or being asked to sign up to something where, let's start with capacity. You're being told, I think there's a change of position on numbers, and there was a lack of clarity quite clearly, because and I would suggest, Madam, there's still a lack of clarity, because you're right, there's a reference to 750 to 1,000 as a range in the policy. Then you have para 12.15 saying a working assumption of about 900. We've had it's no longer a working assumption anymore. And certainly we've suggested, Madam, that you shouldn't have working assumptions in a submitted plan or an examined plan. But I'd also suggest, Madam, that the master plan doesn't bring the clarity that you're being told that it does. It does refer to circa 900 units in the executive summary. I don't think there are page numbers on the document I've got of the concept master plan, so apologies, but there's a section called executive summary where it says that. But it also refers to up to 900 houses in a section called the concept master plan. So a ceiling figure at 900, well, that could be consistent with the development of 750, which is the bottom end of the range. That might be right. So I don't think the capacity is clear at all. The master plan doesn't bring the clarity that's being suggested. I think it's still up in the air what that capacity is. So I'm not sure that's clear. And on the gap, I mean, it's quite remarkable, I think, what we've just heard, that somehow it's the right way round to look at a strategic gap that the council has allocated, the council's retaining, the council has a policy on strategic gap. It's chosen to do that. That's absolutely fine. But it's asking you to endorse a policy and a capacity for a site with no assessment. And we've heard that now overtly, and it's our understanding as well. There hasn't been any assessment of whether you can deliver it in that gap consistent with the council's own policy. And you've been told there's been a start made in the concept master plan. Well, I went through, Madam, and unless I'm missing something, I can't see any analysis of that at all, apart from a recognition that there's a desire to avoid coalescence, which is one element of policy in E7, but not everything. So this seems to me, Madam, to be absolutely an example of plan making on the hoof. I think you heard it last week. This is a really good example of exactly that. We're hearing pretty fundamental changes here and now on things, and then we're also hearing there's various things which haven't happened yet, and they are fundamental to this allocation. So probably I can't probably add too much more than that, madam, but I think you'll be putting in a very difficult position to endorse. And I should say, I don't have an issue at all with the principle of this allocation or development at north of Winchester at all. But I think you've got a plan that's been rushed out quickly and the work is being done. Some's been done, but there's an awful lot still hasn't been done, but you're being asked to approve it now. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much for that. I'm so sorry. Littleton and Harestock Parish Council, please.
Thank you. Liz Wynn, Parish Councillor on the Parish Council, and the Sir John Moore Barracks will be built within our parish. Thank you for the questions that you've raised about the impact of the settlement gap and the lack of consideration to what it might look like. There's a confusing picture. There's a number of variations on the potential for the settlement gap. There's a DIO version. There's a version that currently exists. There was no inclusion of the settlement gap in the review that was undertaken. So it's unclear about how that decision, who's going to decide how that's made, and we feel quite strongly that it should be defined by the plan first, and that the master plan should follow from that, and any other planning permission should recognise a defined settlement gap. And I think following on from that, the lack of all the confusion about the gap means that it's actually really difficult to conduct a proper review of the number of homes. I think that's one of the things it's a constraint that's not really considered properly, because there's a lack of consideration of the gap and the candidate sink as well, in fact. So I think our view is that we haven't, although there's confidence about the 900 number, we've not seen a proper review of the number of houses that's possible on that site, given all the constraints that you've also outlined.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Sorry, just to say, I am going to go on to flood risk, transport and delivery. So save your comments on those points, please, for the next round. DIO?
Thank you. A couple of short points from me, and then I'll go to Mr. Woodward to deal with heights, and Mr. Gardner to deal with the process. Firstly, on PDL, our position is it's not correct to say that only bits of the site are PDL. Of course, there are substantial areas of built development, but the other unbuilt areas are used for military training in conjunction with the buildings, and therefore they fall within the definition and the framework of PDL, because they are curtilage used in association with the military training facility. The curtilage of a military training facility with outdoor training facilities is bound to be much larger than curtilage on other forms of built development. So that was the first point. Second point, on capacity, I endorse and don't repeat what's already been said. You referred to the SAC. Just for your note, in our Reg 19 response, paragraphs 1.23 to 1.25, we explain why that's not a constraint. The amendments to the LURA placing obligations on wastewater undertakers will ensure that there's no requirement to mitigate up to 2030, up to I think 669 units, and post 2030 the obligation will fall on the undertakers. So in terms of phosphate and nitrate pollution, that's not going to be a constraint on the capacity of this site.
And that's reference 1.23 to 1.25.
That's right, yes. Okay. And of course, there's the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which may deal with this with systemic mitigation anyway. So the position may well change even more favourably. So in terms of the process, then in relation to the settlement gap, if I could ask Mr. Gardner to explain what underpins the master plan and how that was looked at.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Rob Gardner, Avison Young Town Planner. A couple of documents I wanted to draw your attention to. The first is the concept master plan, which on my version is page 27, 26 and 27. There are a series of sort of vignettes, if you like, which cover different technical.
Sorry,
Sorry.
could I ask you to
Could I lean
speak
in a bit?
into the microphone,
Yeah.
please?
Is that better?
That is better. Thank
Okay.
you.
So yeah, the concept master plan, my version of it has the page numbers as 26 and 27. There are a series of sort of vignettes which cover different technical matters on that. You have that.
I do.
And then turning to our EIP statement, Appendix A, which is our plan showing the proposed revisions to the settlement gap. That is essentially how we suggest the matter should be resolved.
Sorry, can I take you back to defining page 26, 27, and you've got LVIA testing and height opportunities.
That's the one I was about to talk to.
Oh,
yes.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So that in conjunction with Appendix A, I think the suggestion that there's been no testing of the landscape and visual impact of built development in the settlement gap in this area is incorrect. We'd beg to differ on that. We've carried out quite a bit of landscape visual impact work as part of the preparation of the concept master plan, and that is summarised in that vignette number 6 that you see there. That identifies areas which are suitable for higher development, taller development, and it shows that the settlement gap on the southeast of the settlement. So our suggestion is that the wide swathe which goes between Hairstock and the southeastern line of existing development would be retained as settlement gap, and then another section on the other side. And our LVIA work indicates that would give really clear visual separation. And I think when you go and see that on the site, you'll see that the combination of topography and landscaping means that you basically can't see the built development from that area.
And that has been LVIA in accordance with Livia.
It's yeah. I mean, it hasn't got to the stage where we've done verified views and that sort of thing, but we've got the isopacite plan, the what's the word, the sensitive receptors, all that LVI work, and we've got a firm of landscape architects who are out on this, and they've been looked at this from all those viewpoints. The work that they've carried out has been fundamental to the testing of the site capacity. And we have been through that process with officers from the City Council. We have tested different heights of development in different locations to see what sort of pokes up above the trees, quite literally, with many of the people sat on the opposite side of the room. So we have been through that process quite considerably, I suggest.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. What about other constraints?
Sorry, can I just sorry, Woodward, just to confirm that our instruction as DIO MOD was that this is a sensitive site. We're not looking at this as an opportunity to overdevelop. What we're trying to do is create a balanced scheme, as we've said. So
when you say sensitive site, sorry, what do you mean by that?
It's sensitive in the sense that we recognise the local people who are, in terms of Littleton, they do not necessarily they certainly don't want a conjoined position with Winchester. They do not want sort of further development that just comes straight out of Winchester and then completely adjoins Littleton. So we've recognised the sensitivities of all of these issues as part of the envelope of development that we've created. So we have looked at the subtlety of how you distribute the development across the site and recognise that the sites and the sight lines into the site have been respected, and the densities of development will also respect the immediate the immediate vicinity of the development as well. So it's very important to understand that whilst we're only at concept plan level, that we have done a lot of work that enables us to move relatively quickly into a planning application. So a lot of the evidence base is already there to enable us to move to that next stage. It's not as if we're sort of wrestling around to come up with alternative solutions. The thought here has been to do the analysis first and then provide the concept master plan and then move relatively quickly into a planning application.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
In terms of other constraints,
sorry.
You asked for heritage, no designated assets.
Yeah.
There are some remnant structures which will largely be retained. The master plan shows our heritage trail with
I'm clear on heritage.
Open space, about 60% of the site, 51 hectares, will be retained as open space. Land obviously not designated as an SSSI, SPA, SAC. The impact on protected sites would be through nutrient pollution, which, as I've explained, is not a constraint. Flood risk, vast majority of the site is low risk, and the site is large enough to accommodate any attenuation that would be required in relation to the winterbourne. The sink, the master plan shows that being retained in totality.
Sorry, what you're moving on. What about the candidate sink up in the north? Because that's designated at the moment, and we on the master plan we do see some development up there, and in addition to the park and ride.
We do a couple of overarching points, then I'll hand over to Mr. Gardner.
Oh, okay.
Firstly, the proposal to designate the candidate sink as a sink derives from DIO's own ecological survey and evidence base, so this isn't a new issue. Secondly, obviously, it's not a land use designation that has any legal obligations or requirements. The requirements would be to deal appropriately with protected species, but in a site this size, with 51 hectares being left undeveloped, there's no suggestion that protected species can't be dealt with appropriately. There's also no suggestion that 10% biodiversity net gain can't be achieved. And then the question is making effective use of the PDL as per the framework sufficient justification for any encroachment on the candidate sink. And in a site of this nature, given the substantial unbuilt land, the biodiversity net gain, the appropriate dealing with protected species, the retention of the existing sink, the retention of the existing buffers and trees, planning judgment overwhelmingly would be yes in that circumstance. I don't know if Mr. Gardner wants to add anything.
Mr. Granger?
Relatively little, actually, but as I say, we know all about the nature on there. It's not a statutory designation, and it comes to be mitigated as part of a detailed proposals with a planning application. So not much to add, really.
Okay, thank you for that. Vistry, did you want to say?
Just very, very briefly, if that's okay, Madam, just to conclude, having heard what we've now heard on this gap point where I made a point initially. I'm not sure there's any further clarity that you've heard in the light of everything there, personally. My note is that the council have confirmed they've done no work about the gap and the impact of development on the gap. And we've now heard from DIO, from Mr. Gardner, that where you can look for the work that has been done is vignette number 6 in the concept diagram, which is entitled LBI testing and height opportunities. I think we all know in this room, as does the council, because para 7.6D of the local plan says so in the supporting text to policy NE7, gaps are an established spatial planning tool, not a landscape one. Obviously, there are some landscape input into this consideration, but it's a spatial planning tool that the council's chosen to bring into force and retain and roll forward. Issues of height and where development is, of course, one part of that, but policy NE7 sets out very clearly that there are some 3 elements of a test for settlement gaps in the council's own policy that you need to look at. Avoiding coalescence is one, not undermining the function of the gap in terms of separate identity of settlements is another, and it shouldn't threaten the general open and undeveloped nature of the gap. 3. So there's 3 tests in the council's own policy. And I think we're hearing an agreement that those tests haven't been applied by anybody here. The council's done none, and the DIO have maybe done 1, possibly. So there's work. I'm not suggesting it can't be overcome, but I just don't think the work's been done from what we've heard. If that's genuinely what we're being pointed to, the evidence doesn't exist.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Tozer, is it?
Thank you, ma'am. We just heard just now from our friends that this is a very sensitive site, and the parish council would entirely agree with that. But I think it's very important that we're trying to be persuaded that the whole site is to be regarded as previously developed land, when that's clearly not the case. In policy W2, supporting text and in the policy, it refers to part of the site being previously developed land, and therefore not all of it is. And there's also very strong case law which defines what curtilage is, and even though an activity may be associated with the main purpose or the main building, it doesn't of itself therefore form that curtilage. So one shouldn't confuse the site being synonymous with the curtilage, and I think a lot of confusion may be coming out from that, and that has big ramifications in terms of the constraints then which are applied, which you've outlined a number of those. And we would argue strongly that the candidate sink is a strong constraint, and yet the master plan seems to be dismissing that and is allowing building or proposing building to occur on it, which would destroy an extensive area, which in their own admission has got some ecological value and could be enhanced. So I think in terms of what the settlement gap could be, what the capacity could be, the policy W2 is a bit confusing in that it doesn't set out clearly all the constraints, all the material considerations. Some things are in the supporting text, some things are in the policy, there's things that have been omitted. So confusion arises, it's incoherent. So in that sense, there's a question as to whether the policy as presently structured is actually effective.
Or what you said things have been left out. What are you referring to there?
Well, one instance, the City Council passed a declaration for a nature emergency, and that's not noted in the supporting text, because quite clearly, given the ecological value of the existing site and the candidate's site sink, then that could be the basis of a nature recovery strategy and be able to link different habitats and allow wildlife to move around. So there's an opportunity there to make a very good example and do something to address the nature emergency, which seems to have been pushed aside or not considered at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Do the DIO want to come back on any of those points? Sorry, you've all got your nameplates up.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you.
You want to speak? Okay, just quickly, because I don't need much help on those points.
Two very short points,
yeah.
Just for your notes. Paragraph 1.20 of our Reg 19 representations, we argued that the wording of the supporting text should be amended to reflect that the whole of the site is PDL. And secondly, just with regard to the requirement that the evidence for the plan be proportionate, I would submit that there is a robust demonstration that a suitable settlement gap can be maintained. The council has explained the settlement gap policy will apply to any application. What you have before you is the master plan demonstrating 900 units can be delivered with an acceptable settlement gap. The parish council have appended to their representations their version of where the settlement gap boundary should be. And of course, that shows 750 units on the southern part of the site. So nobody is suggesting that the settlement gap here, when it comes to apply the settlement gap policy, would actually constrain delivery of 900 units. So the evidence base is proportionate to demonstrate that is not a constraint on the indicative capacity.
Thank you.
Just very briefly from me, on the PDL side of things, just to give you an indication, this is around the curtilage points, to give you an indication of what the military use that site for, because I think the impression perhaps given at the moment is that it's sort of almost like a sort of landscape zone or whatever. I mean, they use it extensively. They use it for nighttime exercises, navigation exercises. They use it to teach recruits to set up shelters, both in woodland and in open land. They use it to teach them to familiarise themselves with their kit and the carrying of heavy loads around that area. So it's sort of off-site. It's, if you like, from the sort of mown and clipped bits of the site, but it's absolutely vital for that overall piece of training. So as a result of that, we always have maintained with the council that it's part of the curtilage. It's a vital part of the curtilage, and if it wasn't there, they would all have to get on a bus and go and do that training somewhere else. So that's why it's there, and that's why it's part of the curtilage.
Thank you for that. Could I just have a response from the council on that point? You've heard what's been said. The site in totality is PDL. Should that be reflected in the policy?
I think subject to detailed examination of the evidence as to exactly which areas are being referred to, I don't think that would cause us any difficulties.
So, sorry, so you don't accept that the whole site is PDL? You've heard what the DIO have said?
I don't think we've heard in sufficient detail exactly which areas they are referring to be able to say here and now. It may well be that that information can be made available and we can come back to you with a final view, but just not able to commit ourselves at this stage.
Okay. Okay, I'll think about that. Okay, I want to move on, please. The sticky issue of transport. Now, I understand the council's position here. Mr. Sim, you wanted to raise that issue, and of course this is the issue that two main accesses are taken from the Andover Road, and you want to tell me what you think about the impact that has, taking into account the diversion of Andover Road. Am I correct?
Thank you, Madam. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So we're talking now about 900 dwellings. So that will be nearly a 50% increase on the amount of traffic that is generated by the Kings Barton development. This is going to overload Winchester Avenue, the route through Kings Barton. So we're not opposed to the development at all, but we're opposed to closing Andover Road, just to repeat that point, because it will overload Winchester Avenue. It will make residents' life a misery. You've seen our evidence about the impacts that are likely to occur: road casualties, severance, noise and air pollution. Undoubtedly, there'll be increased carbon emissions generated by this approach. So our view is that this is completely wrong.
Okay, let's just clarify the situation. I don't mind whether it's Hampshire County Council or Winchester.
I can go first, and obviously my colleagues from Hampshire can add. So just to be entirely clear, from the strategic transport assessment, which was basically endorsed and signed off by Hampshire colleagues here, Sastree Armed and National Highways, we modelled basically the whole of Sir John Moore Barracks, basically with the closure of Andover Road. The important thing to note is obviously the park and ride facility, because obviously that helps to reduce trip generation. And obviously what we want to do is get the park and ride in from the beginning. So obviously it affects people's travel patterns and demands. And that is important in terms of obviously how people leave and enter the site. And I do think that's an important point to make. But like I say, we have modelled it through the strategic transport assessment, which is being signed off by both obviously Hampshire in their statutory arm and National Highways. So we have modelled the impact of closure of Andover Road.
Okay. Hampshire County Council want to say anything?
Thank you, ma'am. Ben Clifton, Strategic Transport Manager. Just to really endorse what Adrian's just said, I think the only thing I will add is our view would be that the transport assessment for this site, this allocation, would need to consider its impact on the committed development layout that's presented by Barton Farm. So we'd expect it to consider its impact on junctions off site, which it will do, but we're comfortable that's the correct approach and ties into the park and ride provision.
And I'm sorry, would you mind speaking into your microphone?
Sorry, yeah, I'm just saying that we would anticipate that the Sir John Moore Barracks site will provide a detailed transport assessment, which will demonstrate its impacts on the committed layout of Kings Barton, and that will consider the impact on junctions and reach conclusions over mitigation, which I'm sure we'll come on to from our perspective includes the park and ride provision.
Okay, but at a high level, you were involved in the STA and obviously you signed that off.
Yes, that's correct.
No, I understand. Okay, and Mr. Gagg, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Since we're talking about transport, I should just explain that our main interest in attending these sessions is how the proposals in this plan will affect the overall carbon footprint of transport in Winchester. And I'm somewhat disconcerted that transport discussion is always about traffic volume, planning traffic flows, etc. And we would very much like to go outside of that. We welcome in the plan the overall commitment to doing things so that there is a modal shift away from the motor car to more walking and cycling and use of public transport. But our theme throughout these sessions will be that we need to have much more specific thinking about how that will be done if we're going to have the necessary impact on transport emissions to comply with policy CN1, which is to effectively reduce Winchester's carbon emissions to net zero by 2030. Could be 2035, could be 2040. I don't feel that the provisions of this plan are specific enough to have a sufficient impact on that overall figure. The Sustainable Transport Assessment predicts that transport emissions will increase by 1% as a result of this plan, but that's only looking at traffic flow. The Sustainable Transport Assessment does not consider the impact of the proposals on emissions because, quote, the consultants did not have the tools to do so. I just feel that this plan really does need the applications of some tools, wherever they're obtained, that will do so. So that's the general background that you asked for. Specifically about this session, we are concerned about two groups of things. One is the quality of the discussion about the sustainable and public transport provision that will serve this site. And secondly, the inclusion of the park and ride. To take the first one, we are very pleased at the general aspiration to encourage sustainable transport, cycling, walking, public transport. But we do feel that there need to be specific requirements of this site spelt out in the policies, because however good the developers are, we're at the cutting edge of how you develop a site to encourage sustainable transport and discourage car use. So I think we all need all the help we can get. And I believe that we're not going to make any progress at all unless the council specifies the quantity of walking and cycling infrastructure, not just the design parameters, but there should be a formula and the council should adopt the formula, and Active Travel England should develop a formula for just how many miles of cycleway and walkway you need on a development of this size to encourage easy, sustainable transport access. I don't see that in any of the plans that have been produced. I do welcome the commitment to permeability, to in general the idea of cycleways and footways and through routes, and I do welcome effectively the low traffic neighbourhood nature of this development. But I do think that the policy needs to include specific reference, not just the aspiration to connect with bus routes, but which bus routes to connect with and where that connection will be made. Similarly, there does need to be much more specificity about, as I was saying, the quantity of infrastructure, but also the essential connection points of that. And there does need to be specific requirements relating to the likely activity of this site. If, for example, there is a good direct cycle route to the shopping centre at Week, that will reduce the amount of car use. But we haven't got into specifics like that. So I'd like much more specific requirements. On the park and ride site, we are concerned that a park and ride site, it is assumed that a park and ride site is going to help reduce traffic. There is a lot of research suggesting that it might well affect the number of cars between the site and central Winchester, but it will encourage car access to Winchester. And we worry that that hasn't been included in any of the calculations or in any of the sustainability assessments on this site. And there is relatively little demand for parking on access to Winchester from the north, but it will only serve to increase the amount of traffic coming in and add to the concerns of the Kings Barton residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Could I ask the council to come back on this point? The 2 points, whether quantitative measures should be provided within site allocation policies. You might touch on what the monitoring says in relation to that. And sorry, just deal with that first, and then I'll get on to the park and ride, because I want to ask a question on the park and ride.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Gagg, for your comments. Obviously, our initial response is it's important to read the plan as a whole, because we've got a whole topic on sustainable and active travel in the local plan, which obviously any application would need to comply with. Those policies, I should add, actually went through Active Travel England, who are a new strategy agency. We were one of the first pilot authorities to put our policies through their kind of rigor and test to make sure that we did actually kind of nail exactly what we wanted in terms of basically the sustainable and active travel. And they gave us really helpful feedback on the wording of those policies. Also, we were working with Hampshire again on the wording of those policies to make sure that we could do that. I'm not aware that there is such a formula out there that could kind of equate to or with any kind of resilience or being tested. I'm not aware that there's anything that exists, so I wouldn't want to invent something that basically we couldn't obviously adhere to. In terms of obviously the you mentioned about the bus routes connect to, the quality of the infrastructure, the connection points, all of that detail will come through the master planning process, which obviously will need to support obviously the planning application. So that would all be obviously the next stage. But like I say, I'm certainly not aware that there's some kind of magic formula that basically says what length of footway, etc. But we have had discussions with the DOI about, for example, crossing Hairstrop Road, how kids would actually get to the primary school and things like that, what level of kind of cycleway provision, because I've been out on site with them and discussed those particular issues.
Okay, park and ride. Now you've heard it's a matter that's been raised by quite a few people. You've heard the concern that far from reducing cars, park and ride can increase or encourage the use of private motorised forms of transport.
So I think in terms of the way the city is kind of its geometry in terms of where it is, obviously we've got a lot of park and ride sites to the south of the city. There isn't one in the north. The Winchester movement strategy identified the need for one in the north, and you only have to travel along Andover Road in the morning to see the volume of traffic coming down Andover Road. And obviously this is obviously a key kind of pivotal point where people could actually pull into the park and ride, use it to get into town. But like I say, that at the moment it's skewed towards the south of the city centre rather than north. Now, obviously, if people want to access the south, they'd obviously have to do more trips to get round to the south of the district, depending where they're coming from. But like I say, we do feel evidence-based in the Winchester movement strategy that there is a demand for a park and ride in the north of the city.
Yeah. Okay. And I've read the evidence on that. Okay. I want to quickly move on to delivery of this site within the plan period. Now, we dealt with this and we had a long discussion, and I heard from many people around the table that the inclusion of delivery, particularly in the 5-year period, was unrealistic. We heard, did we have somebody from the DIO?
No, we didn't have.
But we heard that that whilst the site was occupied, that you've got the Purbright site, that the intention was to move very swiftly. Could I just turn to the DIO? Could I have your intentions with this regard? In this regard.
Thank you. I'll ask Mr. Woodward to put the flesh on the bone, but it's more than intention. He'll explain that an implementation order has been made and the site.
What does that mean?
He can explain in military terms what that means. Essentially, they've been given their marching orders to clear off, and they'll do so by no later than the 31st of March 2027. And he will explain where the swing space is at Purbright and how that's all secured.
Yes, I think it's just quite straightforward, really. Essentially, there'll be a cessation of training at the base from August 26. Vacant possession in terms of the army per se will leave into.
Sorry, August 26.
Yes.
Training stops.
Cease there.
Okay.
And then effective vacant possession December 26. And then the site is handed over to the DIO. The distinction there is that when it's a military base, it's MOD responsibility and head of establishment. The DIO become the head of establishment once the army has left. Effectively, the estates team takes over. But obviously, in preparation before they leave, it's very important for us to move forward the town planning alternative use for the site. Otherwise, the site will just remain vacant, and then there's guarding issues and all that sort of thing. So it is important that we get a resolution in terms of where we're heading here. But the army will be leaving. Where they will go is Purbright, and their long-term home will be in Alexander Barracks, Purbright, as part of a future Soldier Academy. The contracts for that have been let in terms of construction. The first building has taken place already on site. In terms of an interim position, the units are moving to Brunswick Lines and also Elizabeth Barracks at Purbright. So already those decisions have been made. So the site will be vacated, as I say, effectively by March 27. And essentially we can follow that up with a correspondence if that would help.
Sorry, so March 27,
Yes,
the site will be
totally vacant.
vacant.
No military engagement at all.
Okay. And in terms of what's happening in the planning field during that time?
So in terms of the town planning side of things, obviously from our point of view, we need this local plan to succeed and be successful, so that we are in a position to make a planning application during the course of this year, so 2025, with a view to getting consent in 2026. And on the basis that that happens, then that enables us to also work with our partners or potential partners for the full redevelopment of the site and bring forward the master plan in the current form that you've seen already.
And you refer to partners. What does that mean?
So essentially what happens is that obviously we can't, or we don't normally anyway, forward sell a site without planning permission. So we would be looking to make an outline planning permission or get planning permission during 2026. But in the meantime, we have a number of partners that we work with on a number of our sites throughout the whole UK.
Developer partners.
Developer partners,
Oh,
yes, yes,
okay.
just to be clear. So it's a combination of ensuring that the military move takes place, which I've confirmed, and also that we get planning consent for the site in good time to enable us then to start construction during 2028, I would suggest, given the fact that vacation is 2027.
So sorry, so in simple terms, you get the outline consent, the DIO, then you partner up with somebody, and then what you're intending is that they will put in reserve matters.
Yes, so we will work with them. We don't necessarily transfer 100% of the site. We quite often retain the freehold actually to ensure that we maintain an engagement. So in a sense, it's a partnership approach to delivering the site. But in terms of the partner, they have the expertise to come along and actually formally develop the site, because the military themselves generally do not do housing-led development schemes.
So how long does that process take to engage a partner? Because we're up to outline permission, you're hoping, putting in an application late 25, consent is in place, outline 26.
Yeah, so we will start on the premise, to be candid, that the local plan survives. In fact, probably even if it doesn't survive, to be honest, we will still put a planning application in, probably, because we have a vacant site, and so therefore we need to ensure that we've got an alternative use. But we will start to have conversations with prospective partners during the course of the back end of this year. So 2025 we'll start having conversations.
So what you're saying, sorry, so you will have a partner in place.
It will take time. It usually takes it takes about a year to get a development management agreement in place. So just to be clear, sorry if I'm not being clear, we will start to have conversations with prospective partners during the back end of 2025 with a view to having a partner in place by the end of 26, early 27.
Okay, and then you'll move, with partner in place, you'll move to reserve matters.
Yes.
So that's early 27. And so, okay, tell me what happens then. You've got your partner in place, end of 26, 27, then you're putting in reserve matters.
Yes, and then after that, even before then, we will be considering the phasing of the development. And
recognising and working with our partner on how we'll actually phase the scheme, and we'll bring forward detailed applications for different phases in the same way as you've heard today.
Okay, and then we've got suggested starting on site 28-29. Okay, thank you for that. Can I just put to the council, so you've seen that timeline, that's looking pretty tight, and that puts flesh on the bones of what we were talking about. So delivery in the 5-year period, 28-29, 29-30, up to 90, is that realistic? So development partner in place early 27, reserve matters application coming in end at the earliest 27. Is that realistic? 40 coming forward 28-29. End of 26, early 27, he said. Yeah.
All I could say is obviously that we obviously entered into a planned performance agreement with the DOI, but they have indicated they're going to submit heads of terms very shortly to us. And obviously we want to, and I'm sure they would want to continue that ongoing collaborative relationship with the PPA to basically bring forward those sites as quick as possible. And as I mentioned before, they've got to create a return for this to pay for everything they're expending on their existing new training site. And they don't want to leave the site without planning permission because obviously there are security and maintenance issues. They are, as part of this work, also looking at obviously what buildings on the site can be potentially converted. So there may be some other quick wins that could happen on the site. But like I say, that's as much as we know at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see some nameplates up. I want to bring this discussion to a close. Could I just go to Mr. Sim, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Just very briefly, because the views we put forward are not just ours, they're also those of parish councils nearby, 4 parish councils who also understand the implications. On carbon emissions, well, clearly the way to minimise carbon emissions for traffic that's coming into Winchester is to keep Andover Road open, because it's mainly a free flow road, so speed limits of 40 to 50 miles an hour, which are ideal for minimising carbon emissions. Very few side roads, very little development alongside. Compare that with Winchester Avenue. It's got a primary school, it'll have a community centre, it'll have a shopping centre, it's got umpteen side roads, and it's got 4,500 residents. Clearly, carbon emissions will be made much worse. On the park and ride, we see that it's said that there will be 850 parking spaces provided. We were directed to find out why there's so many spaces required to County Council reports, survey report, and that identified that 187 drivers would use a park and ride site. That can be provided in Kings Barton, and we welcome the Kings Barton Park and Ride site of 200 spaces, because that will enable a better service to be provided. And we understand it'll be a joint service, not only for the park and ride users, but also for all the residents who need to get into the city centre or go to the station without having to drive by car. So but the park and ride, the 850, we haven't had no explanation from the City Council as to how they've derived this massive figure, the requirements. The County Council survey suggests only 187. Thank you.
Thank you. PIO?
Thank you, Madam. Yeah, just a couple of points of reassurance, really. First of all, around sustainable and active travel. I think we broadly support most of WINAC, what WINAC have said around that travel. We've looked at linkages through the site as an integral part, a really fundamental part of the concept master plan process. We recognise the significance of Harestock Road to ensuring connectivity. We've progressed work on that to the level of looking where the highway boundary is, looking at where the opportunities to narrow and traffic calm and really make that as pedestrian cycle friendly as possible. So that work is absolutely ongoing and is fundamental with the planning application. Just a couple of points or a few points around delivery. I mean, there are some things that stand out on the site which I think are relevant. It already has an existing access in place. There are no major infrastructure challenges to overcome. In that sense, it's in a single ownership, the DIO. There's no ransom or third parties involved as there are on other slow delivering sites. All the services are there now. They will be remodeled, but they are already there, so there's capacity in those. The demolition process is straightforward, relatively straightforward. All the buildings date from 1986, so there's no asbestos or any, and none of them are particularly tall. That's all relatively straightforward. They're all low rise. There are extensive areas on which to store hard standing and arisings from the demolition process, so it can be reused. So that's another positive. And probably the other one is the site really lends itself to phasing. It lends itself to be developed out in simultaneous phases. You've essentially got sort of northern area and southern area. That lends itself to potentially 2 sales outlets, 2 brands, and quick delivery. So they are points of reassurance, really, madam.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll quickly go to Vistry.
Thanks, madam. Just a very strategic point, really, rather than getting into any of the detail, but just to conclude something which is interesting for me to hear. So just to clarify, it was just to know if you were concerned on the soundness of the terms of this policy, as I've suggested or we've suggested. What you have heard today is that I think there's agreement between the parties here that the site's 100% PDL, or I think that's what's been put forward. I'm not offering a comment on that. You've also heard that there would be an application submitted on this site, whether the site's allocated or not, and I've got no doubt that's absolutely right. With a 100% PDL site, why wouldn't you? So clearly, if you did come to that finding, what you wouldn't be doing is undermining housing delivery in Winchester.
Thank you for that. Okay, that was a long session, but I don't need any help on that. Let's break for quarter of an hour. We'll come back just after past, and we'll deal with the last 2 sites. This session is adjourned until, let's make it 25 to 1. Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 25 to, and this hearing is resumed. Let's move quickly on to St. Peter's car park. That is site W3. Now, this is a city centre site on the north walls. It's a new allocation. It's currently used as a car park. Is it a council-owned site?
It is. It's a city council-owned site.
And you put to me that developing city centre car parks is an important element of the climate emergency strategy in reducing air pollution and traffic congestion. And it's in association with park and rides to the north of the site, north of the city or town, using brownfield sites, provision of housing, and provides housing close to facilities and services. That's what you put to me. Is there anything that the council would like to add to that, please?
I think that's a really helpful summary. Thank you. I think in terms of air quality, that is an important consideration because we've got an AQMA at the moment in the city centre, and actually interesting, the kind of traffic levels have actually decreased since COVID. But I do think it's an important part of our climate emergency to make the most use of obviously brownfield sites which are accessible. And obviously, clearly, this is a site. The property board have obviously agreed to dispose of the site. So we've got agreement to dispose of the site. And as I mentioned, the city council is obviously developing the sites itself as a property portfolio. Now, whether or not that is one that they develop or obviously move to a third party is yet to be decided. But like I say, we feel that it is a really good site to be redeveloped. In terms of obviously, is it kind of how it's developed and things like that, we've had some indicative master plans done for it, but no consultation has yet taken place on it.
So there are quite a lot of constraints. Again, you get the heritage flooding. you're referring the evidence to a heritage impact assessment that concluded that a proposal could improve the setting of nearby heritage assets. Which ones was that referring to, and in what way?
So we've got the Winchester Conservation Area.
The conservation area, okay.
The heritage impact assessment was undertaken at the request of Historic England and done in collaboration with them to do with a number of sites that basically they had initial concerns, if I can put it that way, about. They've now agreed to all the findings in that heritage impact assessment, and obviously they filtered into obviously the policy wording, which obviously Historic England have agreed to. But yes, there is a great opportunity in this one to basically improve obviously the conservation area.
So it's the conservation area generally. Okay, and that particularly across the road, is it?
It kind of basically where City Walls is, it kind of nips into the site a bit. It's kind of down the area. It's not shown on the policies map.
Okay, and there are policy requirements that talk about, I'm just looking at W32, which talks about high standards of architecture. And then we've got relationship with conservation areas, listed buildings. Where are the listed buildings? Is that across the road? On the...
If it would be helpful, we could actually produce a plan for you that shows the extent of the conservation area and listed buildings. Our heritage officer is not here today, but like I say, we can.
Don't worry, I'll look on the policy map. It'll be on the policy map, won't it? And then you've got another one which says the proposal take advantage of the site's close proximity to Winchester town centre. Is there anything there that deals with height?
There's not anything in the policy itself. We did have a discussion with Historic England about that. I think certainly along the frontage there is the opportunity in terms of basically it's a kind of gap site, and I don't quite. It's the kind of historical origins in terms of whether or not it was building on it, or whether or not it was a kind of bomb site or what it was. But there is the opportunity to obviously look at different heights across the site. But that work would obviously all be undertaken. I say we had some initial indicative layouts about what could be achieved on the site. Like I say, they'll go down the pre-app route.
Okay, and flooding. How does it deal with flooding? Paragraph 12.36, I've got a note.
Yeah, so there's a criterion in policy W3, which is Roman numeral basically X and then 3. Basically, it says about the design process, about deculverting the watercourse, because there is the watercourse at the moment underneath the car park. Whether or not there are opportunities as part of the design to enhance that. A lot of the waterways in Winchester are kind of hidden, so there may be the opportunity, but the Environment Agency are happy with that wording.
So that says site-specific flood risk assessment will need to be prepared and agreed that demonstrates how the development will be safe for its lifetime, taking climate change, vulnerability of development uses into account. And where does it say about deculverting?
So that's in the policy on page 326 on the right-hand side. Basically.
Oh yes, yeah. Got it. 13, isn't it? Yeah. As part of the design process, opportunities should explore the deculverting of the water. Of course, compensatory storage will be required. Okay, got that. What about active forms of transport?
Well, again, our response generally is that obviously read the plan as a whole.
Yeah.
Because obviously otherwise we'd be repeating numerous criteria and there'd be confusion about what we're saying in one particular policy. Yeah. We've got a specific topic on sustainable and active transport that we can easily deal with that.
Right, we just spoke about criteria 4. The proposals take advantage of the site's close proximity to the Winchester town centre. What does that mean?
I think in terms of obviously, particularly perhaps older people or things like that, people that are less mobile, because of its proximity, it is very close to the city centre. So we're just saying basically that there is an opportunity there to think about it. Is it young person's housing? Is it older person's housing? I think it lends itself to something, but I wouldn't want to be too prescriptive at this stage. But it is very, very close to the city centre. So
Okay, is that clear? What it means? Number 4, WC4, take advantage of the site. I understand what you're saying in terms of housing mix, etc.
if you'd like, that's something we could certainly look at the wording of that criteria.
Okay, I'm lost, without my printout of the MMs. I want that for the next session, please, and then we can refer to the numbers, etc. Because you are suggesting a number of MMs in relation to this policy, aren't you?
That's correct.
So I'm going from the old version. So that's 70, 79 onwards to 81. So first of all, that's talking about any proposals will need to be designed in a sensible manner at the southern part of the site. Just what you've been saying. Relevant references include, but are not limited to, the conservation area appraisal and Winchester townscape assessment. Okay. What's the rationale? What's the reasoning for that?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? I was trying
PM
to
79.
Yes.
It's an addition to paragraph 1237.
Yeah, the logic and rationale was comments from Historic England to basically clarify exactly what we meant by that particular paragraph. And that was a suggestion put forward by Historic England, which we agree with talking to our heritage officer.
Any proposals will need to be designed in a sensible manner at the southern part of the site, which is located in the Winchester Conservation. And all that, what that's doing is referencing evidence-based documents, isn't it?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Sorry, what that's doing is relevant references include, but are not limited to, the conservation area appraisal and Whitchurch townscape assessment.
That's correct. They are two obviously known facts: conservation area appraisal, which was undertaken in Winchester Town, and the Winchester townscape.
Okay, and you're supporting that?
We're supporting that change because obviously it's signposted to those documents, so we thought it was a helpful addition to the paragraph.
Okay, and then you've got a suggested amendment to W3(3), which refers to the setting of listed buildings, which I don't have an issue with, and then at W3(10), which deals, it's the requirement that we've just spoken about, and it adds on to it: only types of existing development which can be shown are water compatible or essential infrastructure shall take place within flood zone 3B, functional floodplain.
That's correct. Again, they came forward as late representations from the Environment Agency just to add clarification to that policy, because obviously the flood risk area does cover part of the site.
Okay, and are you supporting that?
We are supporting that.
Okay, why? Sorry.
Well, we think it would add clarity to the actual policy itself in terms of basically making it clear. Obviously, it's in national guidance, but they wanted it there. I've got no objection to it being in there.
Okay, is it necessary for the test of soundness?
Yeah, if I'm honest, probably not. But obviously, the Environment Agency suggested it.
Okay, is there anything else anybody wishes to add on W3? Mr. Gagg? No need to repeat anything that's already been said, but the high level comments that you.
Yes, no more high level comments, specific comments. There is again the commitment to active travel, but just to point out that there are potentially key cross routes for pedestrians and cyclists on this site. In particular, it's an opportunity to create a good through route from the Art College to the station, and it would be good if more detailed plans were to enable that to actually take place, so that there can be a safe walking and cycling route parallel to North Walls, to the north of North Walls. And just in response to your specific question about the right balance between parking and emissions, we really do welcome this step, because although it's ostensibly a car park on the edge of town, it's a car park that forces cars to go through the centre of town, and that's particularly a bad thing in terms of emissions. Yeah. So taking this out of the car parking pool will reduce traffic. Because of the one-way configuration, it will reduce traffic going through central Winchester, which we very much welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gare. Could I just turn to the council? How will you be dealing with the issue that, or the opportunity, should I say, that Mr. Gagg has raised? Is there anything in policy that?
Well, there's criteria 5 in policy W3, which talks about obviously the permeable place, and obviously through the other policies in the plan, the design process, which we'll come on to as a separate topic, we would expect obviously to look at those opportunities for it. Clearly, people do cut across the car park, if I call it like that, to access things rather than walking around the car park. So there is an opportunity to look at the through route as part of that design process. But like I say, it's important to read the plan as a whole, because there is a whole suite of policies about how you should approach the design of sites.
Okay. I would like to move on. Let's look at, we're back at on the Andover Road, just off the Andover Road, aren't we, to Barton Farm, just behind Barton Farm there. And this is W4. This is land west of Courtney Road. This is a proposed allocation with an indicative number of homes of 150 dwellings. This is a greenfield site. So site capacity, I don't need any help. There was queries about the status of this land in relation to the section 106 on Barton Farm or Kings Barton. I don't need any further help with that. Thank you very much for all your comments. So let's look at the site capacity. The site is suggested for 150. The developer disagrees with that in a small way. I think they say in the region of 160. What capacity work has been undertaken? I know that the developer has undertaken a master planning exercise, and how have the constraints been taken into account? And this has got similar constraints because, again, we're in a settlement gap, aren't we? We're in the Winchester to Kingsworthy settlement gap. Could I just turn to the council, please?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
So sorry, so could you touch on in terms of constraints, so the settlement gap and transport in particular, and then you've got proximity to railway, biodiversity,
Yeah.
etc. Please. Thank you very much.
In terms of the gap, our view is that this site is to a large extent an area of undeveloped land now extending into the built up area. If you look at Barton Farm on the other side of the railway line and Collie Close and Stoke Road next to this site, this wouldn't extend development any further north than those. So it doesn't impact on the most open part of the gap. In terms of proximity to Barton Farm, Barton Meadows Nature Reserve, yes, it adjoins it, but the plan has other policies that seek to protect sites of ecological importance. The explanatory text to this policy expects that development should look at how the development relates to and improves access to Barton Meadows and scope to possibly enhance it. It also seeks to protect boundaries, and there is a belt of fairly young trees along that northern boundary between the site and Barton Meadows. In terms of transport impacts, there is a requirement for potential off-site works. The there is a new pedestrian crossing now across Worthy Road, which was likely to be the most significant off-site work that might be required. The policy does retain reference to potential contributions to off-site works as a catch-all in case there are any others when a detailed transport assessment is submitted with the planning application. And in terms of capacity, you've probably picked up, Mum, that in the Regulation 18 plan, this was a capacity estimate of 100 dwellings was put in for this site. At that time, there was a requirement to provide 1.5 to 2 hectares of the site as sports pitches, and it was envisaged they would be the buffer between the housing and the railway line. That has since been modified to a more general open space provision. So basically, we previously taken out almost a third of the site for a specific open space requirement. That is now part of the almost normal open space provision. You've probably seen in Carla's original representations, there is an illustrative master plan that puts open space around the edges of the site, particularly adjoining the railway line. And that's where their 160 figure comes from. We would normally, with our about capacity figures, we would normally say within 10% up or down a day is about, and the 160 would be about. I don't think there's going to, if an application came in for 160 and it was acceptable in all other respects, I don't think there's any reason why that would cause a problem in terms of the site capacity.
And noise vibration studies have been carried out, 10% BNG.
Well, there are requirements in the policy for that. Carla can tell you in more detail what they've done, yes.
Okay, let's turn to Carla, please.
Thank you. I'll try not to cover too much of the same ground in terms of the constraints. As was mentioned through our Regulation 19 representations, we submitted a vision document which contains master planning. It was supported by sort of comprehensive suites of technical assessments, which demonstrate deliverability of the site and capacity for 160 dwellings. So as you've mentioned, we're not a million miles away from the council's position at 150, but I think we've come to a point where the technical work has refined the capacity to that degree. Just going through sort of the constraints in turn, in terms of proximity to Barton Meadows Nature Reserve, a preliminary ecological assessment and landscape assessment has been undertaken, which has informed the master planning for the site, and you will see the summary of those assessments in the vision document. And that's informed sort of the master planning approach and the appropriate sort of buffer and sort of setback from the northern tree line and the nature reserve. And I think there's reference to sort of appropriate sort of managed approach to access to the nature reserve. So I think we envisage the site would provide connectivity to the existing sort of rights of way in the nature reserve, sort of in accordance with how it's being used and managed at the moment. In terms of
the pedestrian link from Kings Barton across the railway line.
There's a pedestrian link to the west, which links straight through to Kings Barton and directly to the east through Courtney Road to the Worthy Road.
Yeah.
In terms of the settlement gap, a landscape and heritage assessment has been undertaken as part and was submitted, and the findings of that summarised and submitted in our Regulation 19 representations. And I think broadly the points that Mr. Overcheck have mentioned, I would endorse. Essentially that the site is well contained with residential development to the east and the west in allotments to the south and northern tree boundary, and the development would not extend beyond the existing settlement edge to the north. So we think it would retain the conclusions of our assessment and also the council's, that it would retain the openness of the gap and would not undermine the integrity of the gap. So I think the assessment that's undertaken through consultants on behalf of Carla sort of endorses the findings of the council's land use consultants assessment as well. In terms of proximity to the railway, Mr. Aperchek picked up on this, that we've undertaken a noise and vibration assessment, which has informed the site master planning and proposed approach to mitigation. So the outcomes of that assessment identifies an appropriate buffer to the railway line. So that's informed the master planning, the layout and the capacity for 160 dwellings. So as well as the buffer area, mitigation would also include a noise barrier to the railway line. Moving on to biodiversity, as I've mentioned, a preliminary ecological and biodiversity net gain assessment's been undertaken on behalf of Carla Holmes, submitted with our Reg 19 reps, and that's informed the master planning approach. And that demonstrates that the site is deliverable for 160 dwellings and also achieving 10% biodiversity net gain. Obviously that's a policy requirement, but we've tested that through the BNG strategy, so it delivers, I think it's about 10.3, so just over the 10%. So in terms of the site, it's a agricultural field and of limited ecological value, and the development would retain important ecological features and protect them and enhance them through new planting and other associated ecological enhancements. And as sort of touched on, there'd be a ecology sort of landscape buffer to the northern tree line. So that's taken that into account. Just on the transport impacts, we see your
traffic impacts.
Traffic impacts. I won't sort of repeat sort of what the council already said about the findings of the strategic transport assessment, which has informed the plan. But on behalf of Carla Holmes, there's two sort of key transport assessments that have been prepared to inform the allocation. First of which was a transport feasibility assessment prepared by iTransport and is referred to in our vision document, and that demonstrates that the proposed site access at Courtney Road is capable of supporting development of up to 200 dwellings, so significantly in excess of the proposed quantum of development in the allocation. And that assessment was prepared in liaison with Hampshire County Council Highways, who have supported that there is capacity to accommodate that level of dwellings, but obviously the allocation is significantly below that. Also, there was a further technical assessment undertaken by iTransport on behalf of Carla Holmes, which is an initial traffic assessment which demonstrate that the development will have limited impact on the wider highway network. It's looked at traffic distribution, and particularly, I think the worst affected junction was the Worthy Road, Stoke Road junction. And the conclusions of the assessment identify that it would add less than one additional vehicle movement per minute and to the worst affected junction. So the impact is not significant in transport terms. So I think in terms of the transport feasibility assessment, looking at Courtney Road junction capacity, and then we've looked at the impact on the wider network, which sort of says limited. It says demonstrate the impact is limited, and that is in line with the council's strategic assessment and the findings of that. And I think in terms of mitigation, the council's strategic study and our study looks at what mitigation would likely be, and that would be more in terms of active travel rather than sort of off-site junction improvements, which probably leads on to the other question about the policy criteria.
Okay, sorry, could I just, Hampshire County Council, you were involved in the preparation of that transport feasibility assessment? Yes, what do you say about that?
Yes, ma'am. Apologies, I wasn't directly involved in any of that myself, so I can't really speak to the specifics, but I think I could just clarify and confirm overall our position is that we recognise that in terms of the location of the site and the baseline conditions, we can accept that what Carla are saying in terms of the impacts, particularly around the access onto Worthy Lane, which is the main sort of junction, if you like. And so therefore, I'm as a highway authority, we're quite content with the policy wording and the work that's been done. I'm just apologies, I've not seen that bit of work myself to just be able to speak to it in any detail at this stage.
Okay. Thank you. Carla, have you got anything to add to you? We're talking about traffic impacts.
Thank you, Adam. I think we've covered sort of that fairly comprehensively in terms of deliverability, junction capacity, impact on the wider network, and that sustainable location, sort of well connected to sort of walking and cycling routes and sort of the facilities in the Barton Farm development as well. So I think in the round, looking at the council strategic transport assessment and the work that's been undertaken by iTransport on behalf of Carla Holmes, sort of demonstrates that the site is deliverable for 160 dwellings, and that sort of considers cumulative impact as well.
Okay, and I'll just put it to you. We had a discussion about policy H2 and the phasing. Of course, this being a greenfield site is subject to a phasing restriction, for want of a better word. What do you say about that, please?
I mean, this is a medium-sized site that is readily capable of coming forward within the next 5 years, and that's Carla's intention to deliver this site to address sort of local housing needs. And I did listen to the debate last Thursday, so I'll try not to repeat too much of what was discussed because I know you're aware of the issues.
Yeah.
But I think we're picking up in particular on the NPPF paragraph 60 in terms of boosting the supply of homes. And I know there was quite a bit of a debate last week and partly today about the deliverability of existing, the timing of phasing of deliverability, existing allocations and commitments. And obviously we touched on Kings Barton in the early stages before key infrastructure was delivered. It was slightly slower, and now it's gathering pace in accordance with our trajectory. But I think we were thinking that with some of the assumptions the council are making with existing allocations that we're relying on and commitments in the first half of the plan period to maintain the fibre land supply, they may not deliver as anticipated and may deliver slightly slower due to delivery of key infrastructure. And I think that that was debated quite a lot last week. So in terms of the Courtney Road site, medium-sized site that's capable of coming forward now without delay, that it would help assist in maintaining a 5-year land supply in the event that some of the larger allocations didn't deliver quite as quickly or as expected by the council, which may be the case.
So sorry. So are you saying to me that you're a willing developer to bring that site forward?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct in the short term. And also as part of that debate, last week there was discussion about unmet needs, housing need, and
let's not go there.
And I avoid the pain of going into too much detail on that. But I think just to put it simply, that I know obviously it's moving feast in terms of how plans are coming forward and the latest standard method requirements, and those plans being examined under transitional arrangements. But I would say that if Courtney Road was able to be phased early in the plan period, it can make a better contribution to local housing need, and given sort of the wider situation on unmet need. And I know there's a whole wider discussion about the plan period and what the allowance would be to provide for unmet needs. So that this site could come forward without delay to make a positive contribution to housing supply. So essentially, I think we're Carla of the view that there's no need to hold it up.
Okay, so in the Carla world then, W4, you're saying that you're a willing developer able to take this forward. When ideally would your trajectory be?
Subject to the allocation of the site, we'd be looking to submit an application early next year.
and delivery.
I think that's something that we'd have to review. But
Yeah,
can we come
okay,
back on it?
okay, I just wanted
Yeah.
to explore, but from your point of view, there isn't any, what you're saying is, from your point of view, there isn't any requirement or any reason to delay delivery of this site.
That's correct.
Beyond, okay. Okay, is there anything that the council wishes to add to that, please?
Just very briefly, without going over the whole H2 phasing issue again, the council's position is that there is no problem in terms of 5-year land supply. There's a very healthy 5-year land supply of housing land. Of course, what there is potentially is a finite amount of nutrient mitigation.
Yeah.
And obviously, if that is the case, then we would want to prioritise brownfield sites rather than greenfield. And the only other thing is, even with the phasing that we show, we estimate a 4-year build out starting in 2032. There's no danger of this site slipping off the end of the local plan period. So, you know, there is no harm in terms of local plan and housing provision in delaying it.
Okay. Could I just refer, you're suggesting a number of main mods to this policy, and they go from 82, I think, and as I said, I'm referring to your current SD14A. Could you just introduce those and give me the rationale for them, please?
Thank you. So PM82 clarifies the paragraph 12.41, where it's talking about basically the Barton Meadows Nature Reserve. And that was done in discussion with the Hampshire Isle of Wight Trust, basically about how the site could actually have a positive effect in terms of diverting pressure away from the River Itch in SAC. So there's some proposed textual changes to 12.41. And PM83 basically is clarifying that point that Mr. Rebchek made about the criteria 3, about contribute to any, does say at the moment, any off-site junction improvements, because at that time,
yeah,
Worthy Lane pedestrian crossing wasn't there. So we're just basically moving that to transport improvements as necessary. Like I say, the improvements to the pedestrian crossing across Worthy Lane and the link to the bus stop now is significantly improved, which was done part of basically a gas main improvement works and still money from the Barton Farm development. So that's made a really positive impact on that, the connectivity of this site.
In terms of, sorry, when you say you're adding a criteria, aren't you, or suggesting to provide physical and social infrastructure? What do you mean by that?
So that is basically a request from the Integrated Care Board,
yeah,
to pick up obviously this issue about the need for GP provision and to be clear about what that is. And their suggestion, I think this is a plan-wide kind of change to basically be clear. At the moment, we've got obviously provide infrastructure needed to make the development acceptable. We said basically physical and social to pick up their specific representation that they've made about GP premises.
right. So is that clear from that suggested social and physical?
I think it's clear, but basically, like I say, it came from discussions through long conversations through the ICB about how we could basically frame a policy criteria to basically deal with their kind of particular issue, which is GP provision. We decided not to include obviously a specific requirement about doctors' facilities, because obviously that will change, obviously depending when the application came forward and the need for that. So physical and social infrastructure to us seemed to be the best wording that we could come up with, and that was in discussion with the ICB.
Okay. Okay, and there's a suggested map change, isn't there, also?
That's correct.
Is this in 14A? No, it's not, is it?
It's in,
14C.
14
B?
B, yeah.
B.
B,
What
C
page,
actually.
please?
C, sorry.
it is.
SD's 14C.
Okay.
And
Sorry,
basically,
can I just turn that up because, yeah, I've looked at it.
Yeah.
Basically,
it pulls it back away from the Bolton Meadow Nature Reserve. Basically, it doesn't exclude an area, basically, because there's a tree belt running along the kind of northern boundary. So it pulls it away from that. So it's PM 12167.
okay, so basically that pedestrian link or that link across, it excludes that, doesn't it?
It excludes that.
And that's
Because basically now we've got the pedestrian crossing. Basically, if you look at the plan where Stoke Road kind of comes out into Worthy Lane, that's where the pedestrian crossing is. So actually, we didn't want to bring pedestrians out where there wasn't actually a pedestrian crossing.
okay. Okay.
And just to clarify, it takes out the group of trees, which you can see in the northern area.
Okay, I understand. Okay. Okay, does anybody wish to add anything on this? I can see City of Westminster Trust.
Winchester.
What did I say?
You're back in London.
I'm so sorry.
The City of
City
Winchester.
of Winchester Trust.
Yes, it's a civic society and we have about 500 members. We attach a great importance to settlement gaps, of which there are 3 in Winchester to protect the landscape setting of this city. We've already heard about the Littleton Winchester Gap. We'll hear later about the Winchester Compton Gap. And this is the 3rd one, the Winchester Headbourne Worthy Gap. We object to this land being developed because we think it's an opportunity to actually extend and reinforce the settlement gap between Winchester and Headbourne Worthy. You have to the south on the high ground the Park Road allotments, which look out across this allocated site and then beyond to the Barton Farm Nature Reserve. So spatially and visually, it is all part of this space. And just draw a straight line across it like a map of Africa is not making a really, I think, a useful landscape assessment. And also this site has become more important as the King's Barton development proceeds and the residents of that development come under the railway and come into this space and into the settlement gap space. So by putting development on there, we think it diminishes the overall status of this space, which penetrates down to the allotments in the south. So in summary, we think the review of the settlement gap should extend further south to include this allocated site and also the allotments at Park Road on the high ground to the south.
Okay, thank you. Does the council wish to respond to that? It's raising the issue about the settlement gap, yes.
Stuart Dunbar, MC Landscape Officer. Yeah, just listening with interest to what the City of Winchester Trust is saying. I think the council take a slightly different view because the allocated site is distinct from the nature reserve site. Topographically, it's at a lower level and is separated by the belt of trees and the footpath. And users of the footpath, when they come onto that footpath, they're within the nature reserve space rather than the Courtney Road space by virtue of this belt of trees, which is both a physical and a sort of partial visual barrier. So the council's view is that the allocated site is more related to the city than it is to the nature reserve and the land to the north. I think that's all I can say on that.
Okay, that's helpful.
Could I just respond?
Do you wish to come back?
Just a simple response
Yes.
to that. One of the main functions of settlement gap is to maintain openness this is an open site, and even though you've got tree belts and nature reserves, settlement gaps are not entirely clear in terms of landscape features, but they are normally characteristic of open spaces. And here's a wonderful opportunity to reinforce and protect the openness.
Okay, and in terms of harm, Mr. Baker, what are you saying harm from to?
I think the harm is that it is an intervention between the allotments in Park Road to the north, which looks down onto the gap. And these are very well used allotments. And this is the opportunity to not intervene into the openness of this space by having development. I mean, if it was just one farmstead or one building, the main characteristic of openness would have been retained. But with the proposal, as we understand it, of 150 dwellings, the openness would virtually disappear.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Does anybody have anything else to say? Mr. Poulter?
Thank you. Yes, please. I mean, I'll give my response based on the sort of the headline questions for policy soundness that you outlined at the start. Just to to echo and to endorse what Mr. Baker has said. And I'd also recommend that when you conduct your site visit, if you have the opportunity to view the site of policy W4 from the position of the nature reserve, you'll see exactly what a dominant position it occupies, and that both for users as well as residents, users of the reserve as residents nearby, this is it has a significant impact at the moment because of its openness. In terms of the positively prepared nature of the policy, I'd refer you to the 2022 open space assessment because that seems to be particularly pertinent, and it's been mentioned already by the council. The open space assessment does indicate a deficit of 3.11 hectares of open space to support the adjoining St Bartholomew ward population. Therefore, there is an opportunity, a missed opportunity under this policy to allocate W4 to help address that open space shortfall. In addition, on that open space assessment, there is no attempt to estimate the population numbers that come from the growth of Kings Barton and the fact that this will happen, that will arise during the course of this local plan. And so you are not being offered accurate assessments, which it seems reasonable proportion to do so, of the size of that population, therefore the demand. So again, as the basis of sound policy, I would argue that the open space assessment doesn't hit the mark, and the council in their response in their hearing statement, they've acknowledged this point, but they haven't actually offered any sort of further information other than to confirm that they will do so in due course.
Would you mind speaking into your mic?
Yes, sorry, I'll lean a bit closer forward. I think moving then on, if you heard everything I've said so far, are you happy for me to move on to justify?
I have. Yeah.
So if we look at the sort of justified point, I think based, hearing just now from Carla's own evidence, the target pace of delivery at Kings Barton under W1 is 115 houses per year, target, although recent evidence suggests they're less than that. So this site is already in delivery and will continue to deliver for the duration of the local plan, potentially for further 10 to 12 years until the 2,000 dwelling capacity is delivered. Therefore, rather than including policy W4 in the local plan, I'd argue that surely there's a reasonable alternative to accelerate the in-flight delivery of provision at Kings Barton, which would have a secondary benefit of potentially reducing the duration for which current residents are subject to construction disruption. We've questioned, and we heard already, the erosion of the settlement gap, and argue there is still no robust justification that's been offered for this. It's simply been accepted as a disadvantage that would have to be tolerated. I think, and I think so finally, just in terms of the evidence base, it is worth just, I know it's been accepted and recognised in the responses, but the Regulation 19 response from the local community, there was a very large number and quite a diversity of views expressed in that. So again, that's an evidence of the indication of local opposition. In terms of the effectiveness test, again, we've heard from Carla, they simply cannot say when they would deliver it. So you are being expected to take it on trust that they would apply for and secure and deliver the houses in the number that they've identified within the term of this local plan. And there is no, you know, that they're unable to provide the information that we would need to give you that assurance. Again, given the community response to Regulation 19, I think, you know, we can see that developing the site is going to be contentious and contested. The point around traffic, I'd argue, is not so much the capacity of the junction at Stoke Road and Worthy Road. It's as much about the impact on the houses that line the route to the proposed access site for W4 that will be affected. At present, there are some 40 homes along that route. This is a sort of 1970 completed estate. It is semi-rural in its nature. It's a cul-de-sac. It is one of the estates, because my children do so, where children play in the street on roller skates and play football. That will fundamentally change the character of this estate, both during the construction phase, but then during the subsequent occupation of the new development. And that needs to be taken into account on this, beyond the capacity of the junctions at Stoke Road and Worthy Road and Courtney Road and Park Road. And then finally, just the consistency with national planning policy. We've heard about the potential impact on biodiversity and the lack of a detailed mitigation strategy at the moment, which suggests that there is inconsistency with national environmental policies. Policy W4, it notes but doesn't make adequate consideration for the priority bat species. This is not simply a sort of visual amenity tree belt. The Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust in 2019 did a bat survey identifying priority bat species there, and there are actually 12 of the 17 species that exist in the UK were found along that to be using the corridor, that wildlife corridor of that tree line to the north of W4. Additionally, as I mentioned, the site's proximity to Barton Meadows raises other environmental concerns. One of them being, you know, the landscape impact, and your site visit will help you confirm that. And then the final point I'll cover is, again, Mr. Opachik has mentioned nutrient mitigation. Again, policy W4 fails to demonstrate nutrient neutrality as required under the habitat regulations. And given its position over an aquifer and adjacent to the Winterbourne that flows underneath Barton Meadows and into the River Richin, I'd argue again that this is a pertinent consideration in this case, and the policy as presented doesn't address that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poulter. Could I turn to the council? Is there anything that you wish to address that's been that it might be helpful if you also summarise when you perceive the matters that Mr. Poulter has raised with regard to particularly living conditions, nutrient neutrality, acts, etc. When would they be dealt with?
Thank you. I think the majority of it, I don't want to repeat what's in our hearing statement, because obviously in terms of bats, if I deal with that, we've got our senior principal ecologist sitting directly behind me, and obviously they are a material consideration in any planning application, so we can deal with that. So that's outlined our response in paragraph 1.39 on page 13. In terms of traffic, again, that's outlined in our response, and obviously our colleagues Hampshire will obviously have to deal with basically the traffic impacts when obviously they've been assessed from the developer side of things, and obviously that includes the construction management plan to see obviously how the site is developed. And in terms of B&G, obviously there are policies in the plan, and obviously it's national legislation about B&G, and that's dealt with there. Nutrients, again, is dealt with elsewhere in the policy, and it wouldn't get planning permission if basically we haven't got a nutrient solution.
Okay then. Thank you, Mr. Carla, I was going to say. You know what I mean. Carla Home.
I'll try to be brief, just coming back on a couple of points. As we sort of mentioned, I think we've, through our Regulation 19 representations, vision document, and all the accompanying technical assessments, we've demonstrated that the site is deliverable for 160 dwellings, in view of all the relevant constraints and infrastructure considerations. So obviously I've picked up on the transport delivery and ecology. There's the technical work that we've undertaken proposes of mitigation strategy, on-site ecological enhancements, delivers 10% biodiversity net gain. Our session's been supported by landscape and noise assessments as well, and we'll run through those run through those in detail. So I think there's clear evidence that's been submitted that demonstrates the site's sustainable and deliverable in accordance with that technical work. And just picking up on the points on nutrient neutrality, that's relevant for this site in terms of nitrates and phosphates. We've done an assessment establishing a nutrients budget for the site, which is set out in the vision document, and sort of part of the mitigation would be delivered through sort of on-site sustainable urban drainage system, but also purchasing credits in terms of the council's strategic scheme. So it's perfectly capable of being policy compliant in terms of nutrient neutrality, and we've looked at that. And just one further point was Carla's committed to submitting an application soon with first completions potentially in 2029. So there's a real commitment to delivering the site alongside Kings Barton.
So you're just updating the delivery information that you were giving me. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Those of you around the table, thank you very much for your contributions and for attending today. Your contributions have been very useful. It's now 1:30, and I apologise for the short time period, particularly to the council, because you're going to be back here, and I'm sure many of you will as well. So we will be back at 2. Sorry, it's not optional because we're being recorded and etc. Yes, we will be back at 2. Okay. Sorry, I was just wondering, would it be possible, but we'll be back at 2 o'clock. This hearing session is now closed. Thank you.